IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Thursday, 2 days before we kick off Notre Dame and Texas A&M, and it is time to do our prediction show. That will be second part of today's show. Part one, we're going to talk about keys to victory on the Notre Dame offense, Notre Dame defense, and then part three of today's show. See, I'm mixing all around, 2, 1, 3. Bill Bender from Sporting News is going to join me, and he and I are going to preview and make predictions for some of the big games this weekend, like Georgia Clemson, LSU, USC, and some others. So without further ado, I'm ready to get rocking and rolling with my staff today, and I got my crew today, I should say. I got my guy Trevor Trowbridge there, ready to rock and roll, and Ryan Roberts, you guys know that guy as well, is going to talk about today's game, fellas. So obviously, we all know what's at stake this weekend. We've been breaking it down. Ryan, you and I have been talking you and I have been talking last month about this game back and forth, getting intel, giving intel, all that kind of stuff. And it's here, guys, right? Like Notre Dame's got one more real practice left before, walkthroughs, traveling down. Can't state enough. This is obviously a big, big game for Notre Dame. We've talked about it. We're going to get our keys to victory here in a second. But before we do, folks, remember, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review, sign up for the message board, all that good stuff. But we're ready to rock and roll. Let's get going here with our final Notre Dame Texas A&M preview.
Let's do it, man. Get excited. What is everybody waiting for? Kyle Field, Saturday night, 7:30 kickoff. Let's get it going, man.
Let's begin, guys. We're going to do our keys to victory. And before we dive into like offense and defense, there's some general ones that are obviously important when you're on the road, right? Win the turnover battle. So we're not going to bore you guys with a long breakdown of why that matters. We know why, right? You go on the road, you can't turn the ball over, especially bad turnovers, and you need to try to force some. So that's obviously part of it. And what kind of Notre Dame fan or writer would I be if for the first prediction show of the year, we didn't have a little shout out to the great Lou Emoji? When you talk about special teams, fellas, Lou had one general rule. He didn't get into the return this, field position that. It was do no harm. That was Lou's special teams motto. And that's obviously the key for Notre Dame on special teams at the end of the day. Of course, if you block a kick, get a score, those are all great. But the number one key is do no harm. So those are some general ones that we will look at. Let's now dive into the offense, fellas. And we're going to begin here because I think this is the side of the ball where there's the most angst amongst Notre Dame fans for a host of reasons. And so what are the things that Notre Dame has to do in order to be victorious, to come out on top, for the offense to play at a high level? And it really starts with this one. And you guys all know where I'm going with it, right? This is a key that we have almost every week. And it's going to be important in this game as well, fellas. When you go on the road and you're playing a ranked team in a raucous environment and a loud crowd, the first thing you have to do, big picture, is get off to a good, fast start. Move the ball, control the clock, put the ball in the end zone. That's, Trevor, that right now, that's key number one for this Notre Dame offense. They have got to get off to a fast start. They have to quiet the crowd and also build confidence.
They have to set the tempo of the game, and I think that would be a really good start for Notre Dame. Keep the drive alive, especially with an environment like Kyle Field. I understand what Texas A&M has done over the last couple of years has been a little underwhelming, but I'm sure Alabama in either 21 or 22, don't remember, but the last time Bryce Young went there, 21, yep. I'm sure they weren't thinking much of it either. And one thing that Notre Dame has to be prepared to do is push the ball down the field. And don't be afraid to stretch it vertically. Start fast. That's what they'll be looking for.
There's nothing better in football for when a team goes into a hostile environment that is super loud, and on the first or second play of the game, they have an explosive play, and all of a sudden the crowd shuts up, right? Like, that is the biggest thing for me. I mean, we can talk about the quality of competition all we want. We could talk about the X's and O's. We could talk about the the positional breakdowns as far as who is better here, who is better there. And we will obviously do that during the show. But ultimately, it's going to come down to Marcus Freeman and this coaching staff is bringing his team that is very talented into a environment that everyone is going to be loud, 100,000+ people, and everybody there, for the most part, hates you ultimately, right? So shut them up early, create an explosive play on offense, create a big play on defense, whatever it is that stops the crowd from being as raucous. That is the biggest adversary that you have early on in this game, is that you're going to have to play against the crowd as well. They are going to be loud. You're going to have the headset communicator for the first time, right? So like people are going to be talking about that a ton. You need to make the crowd shut up a little bit.
I mean, there just comes a level of execution that you have to have early in games. And there's a lot, I mean, it kind of factors into where your mindset is. It factors into your preparation, your focus, all those things. But at the end of the day, it really is about getting yourself into a good early rhythm. Notre Dame last year goes into Louisville. Again, not as big of a crowd, but very loud crowd, night game, prime time. They're fired up. They want to get the upset. Notre Dame gets the ball, actually starts moving it well at first, and then what happens? Turnover. Louisville goes right down the field and scores, and Notre Dame was on its heels the rest of the game. I mean, just the rest of the game. And you can't have something like that happen in this game. You have to be able to jump out on this team fast. You look at last year against Clemson, Ryan. Notre Dame takes a 3-0 lead. They force a punt. You fumble the punt. Clemson recovers it at the 41. One play later, 7-3. Notre Dame never really recovered from that. And so when you allow a loud environment to get louder and more excited, it's going to hurt you. But also, while you're building your confidence, you're starting to put doubt in the mind of that team. Or on the flip side, if you will let them get some early confidence, their offense is the concern for them as well. You give them short fields, you let them get into a rhythm with your offense not putting points on the board, they gain confidence. You put that offense behind the 8 ball early, and now you've ramped up the pressure on them. So all these things kind of factor into why this game is like, if Notre Dame doesn't start fast against Northern Illinois next week, okay, maybe they don't win by as much, but they're going to win. You get off to a slow start against Texas A&M, you might get beat. And so that's why it's an important part of it. And then, of course, we always build into the build up on these topics. So what's number 2? What's the best way to get off to a fast start and maintain it? Right? It comes down to the Notre Dame offensive line. They have to limit pressures, especially in key moments, right? Like A&M, I don't care if Joe Walt, Blake Fisher, both were coming back and Charles Jagusah was healthy and moved to guard and everything was perfect. This defensive line's going to get some pressures on the quarterback. It's just going to happen. You have to make sure they're not the key pressures. You 3rd and 4, that's the time you got to buckle down and protect them. We looked at this on the opposite side last year with Ohio State. Notre Dame, I thought, did a pretty good job of getting pressure on Kyle McCord last year, not letting him get comfortable. But on that final drive, there were 2 big plays, a 4th and 7 and the 3rd and 19. And on both of those plays, Ohio State gave their quarterback time to throw, and he made those plays. So it's the key pressures. And in the run game, Ryan, for me, it comes down to this. I'm not expecting them to dominate this game. I'd be shocked if that happens. Here's all I need you to do when you've got Riley Leonard, Jeremiah Levin, Jadarian Price. Get a body on a body. That's it. Get a body on a body, man. Hold your ground, get a body on a body. And if they do that, the skill players should be able to have some success.
I mean, I kind of quantified it as this, and Trevor, I'm interested to see if you kind of agree on this, but like I quantified it as I don't need the Notre Dame offensive line to dominate. I don't even need them to play great. I need them to play clean as possible, because that's the thing that I'm most worried about, is that when you're talking about 6 career starts on an offensive line, a starting group, and you're talking about a freshman at left tackle and a redshirt freshman at left guard, when you're talking about that much just unknown and uncertainty, I'm more worried about, and I'm glad that we have a center that's played a couple games, right? But like, I'm more worried about like false starts. I'm more worried about, just, thinking too much and working over a gap when you shouldn't work over a gap, and releasing a guy because you think that you have inside help and then you don't have inside help, and then he's a free runner. Like those things, those miscommunication things, those things that just come with experience, that really worries me a whole lot more when I'm talking about the amount of starts an offensive line had, because ultimately Sam Pendleton's talented, right? Anthony Knapp is talented. Emil Wagner is very talented, but it's the first game woes of never playing before, the the just little things that kind of get lost in a football game of the false starts or the miscommunication up front that can really do in an offense. So I don't need this offensive line to fire off and get 250 yards rushing for Notre Dame against Texas A&M. I need not a lot of false starts, not a lot of pre-snap penalties, decent communication. I just need them to do a solid job. If they do a solid job, I think Notre Dame's offense has a chance to be really good in this game and potentially explosive at times. It's just going to come down to do not be your worst enemy on the offensive line in the front.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I couldn't agree more. Clean football for them is going to be the biggest indicator of how well they do. So many people hear Notre Dame is starting a young offensive line, and they relate that to talent. And I could not disagree more. You're a full-ride scholarship athlete at Notre Dame who is known as O-line U. You have the talent to play. The biggest differentiator for me is you haven't been in that environment yet. As much as you can simulate crowd noise and pump in however many decibels in practice, nothing compares to the real thing. So for me, evaluating their offensive line in the game and seeing how they come out on the first drive is going to see how they're going to play for me for the rest of the 4 quarters.
I think you guys hit the nail on the head. The offensive line does not need to dominate. It does not need to play great. It just needs to hold its own. I mean, that's it. Like my note that I sent to you guys, it's not offensive line must control the line of scrimmage. It's not that. It's hold up.
Yep.
That's it. Just hold up.
You know, the phrase that I used, Brian, was when you lose a rep offensive line wise, it needs to be a slow loss, not a quick loss, right?
Yes.
Like Nick
Yes.
Skourakis is going to have a few pressures in this game, right? But if those pressures don't turn to quarterback hits, cool. If they don't turn to sacks, cool. Like Anthony Knapp, just be good enough to be able to hold on for dear life for a little bit longer. Slow losses is what I want to see on the offensive line.
Right, because it's also, as a quarterback, I don't mind getting hit. I don't. As long as I've been able to complete my throwing motion, hit me all you want. That's the key, Ryan. And then we saw this last year against Duke. I mean, there's balls Sam Hartman's throwing as he's getting hit in the face. And that's the thing, too, that's a little different about this one is because you have a quarterback like a Riley Leonard compared to a Jack Cohn, a Sam Hartman, who had, obviously great strengths of their own. You don't have to be as dominant in the pocket against pass pro. Like you said, keep a body on a body. If I'm Sam Pendleton and I get beat by Shamar Turner, as long as I stay on him, Riley Leonard can sidestep that, either go run or get the ball out or whatever the case may be. It's when I lose that guy that's when you get into trouble. And that's what would happen last year, Ryan, is they would lose at the line of scrimmage and then the guy'd go running by him and they're getting free runs at Sam Hartman. That's what this line cannot allow to happen. And that's going to be a big key to this game because I do believe that Notre Dame has a pretty decent advantage from a skill versus skill standpoint in this matchup. They can't let this be the great negator, and that's going to be a key part of it. So what are some things that Mike Denbrock can do in order to help with the fast start and help protect the offensive line? Because if your goal is saying we're just going to go out and run duo and inside zone right down Texas A&M's throat all game, I don't know if that'd be a great strategy. Again, if you had Blake Fisher and Joe Alt coming back, this was a top 15 run defense last season.
Tommy Reese would disagree with you on that one.
He probably would. He probably would. But it comes down to what are some things you can do within your philosophy to have success, guys. And one of the things that they're going to have to do is get Texas A&M on their heels. What does that mean? Well, push the tempo, which is something that comes naturally for Mike Denbrock. That's what he believes in. This isn't going to look like Chip Kelly 2010 Oregon, right? But we're going to see a little bit more pace. It comes down to properly using motions and shifts to go at the defense. What does that mean? It means not only doing things that give you leverage, it's doing things to make them think, doing things that make them communicate. The more they have to communicate and talk pre-snap, the more success you're going to be. Ryan, you played linebacker. If you're sitting there communicating and you're talking to the guy next to you as the ball's getting snapped, you guys are behind. Now you got to go make a play. Those are obviously very important things. An inside-out attack, yes, you cannot abandon between the tackles, but be willing to get the ball outside. Use your alignment. A&M's going to try to do this to you. Use your tight ends, your motions, your backs, your receivers to create some extra spacing in the run game. Be willing to get the ball outside. Attack them with your screen game. Be creative with your screen game. Change your launching spots for your quarterback, right? Don't always be right there behind center. something you can do. And then obviously with the read zone stuff, there's a lot of different things that Mike Elko has in his toolbox, Trevor, that maybe you didn't have last year because, and this isn't Riley Leonard's better than Sam Hartman, or it's just different style. There's a lot of things you have in your tool belt at running back that you didn't have last year against this kind of team. Again, not that these two kids are better than Audric Estimate. They're just different. Ryan, Audric was a guy or Trevor, Audric was a guy you needed to kind of get a push and get him going, right? These are guys that just like I said, stay on him, do things schematically to get him in space. You weren't going to design a bunch of things to get Audric Estimate the ball on the perimeter in your passing game. So there's a lot of things that he needs to do that if you can get them on their heels, that's a way to not only get off to a fast start, to protect your line, but it's also a way to slow down that pressure. And that's really where Mike Denbrock's gonna make his presence felt, Trevor.
Absolutely. Do whatever you can to get your playmakers into space. We have heard nothing but great things about Notre Dame's talent, athleticism, length, speed at the skilled positions. Mike Denbrock does a really good job of utilizing those with different skill sets. We've touched on it before that Notre Dame, it feels like, finally has a receiving room where it doesn't feel like they have 5 guys with the same skill set, just with different names. And now it's time to go out and showcase what they're able to do. Look for, I referenced this in a couple of shows, but look for back in 2014, they would get the ball into Will Fuller's hands very quickly. Look for Denbrock to game plan around a speedy pass rush for Texas A&M, especially with the younger offensive line. I'm thinking quick now screens to Jaden Greathouse could be in the future for sure.
Ryan, let me just bring up something along that lines as I kick it to you.
Yep.
You think of that 2014 game. Remember the big concern Notre Dame fans had going into the Music City Bowl, where you had like a new look offensive line. Your O-line had been kind of getting your butt whooped all year. You've got Malik Zaire quarterback. What did Notre Dame do in that game? A lot of jet motions, jet sweeps. The first touchdown of the game, to Trevor referenced, was a tunnel screen to Will Fuller to get the ball on the perimeter. Those are all things they did to kind of negate that. And then once the offensive line got rolling, then they kind of took it to USC. Now, that was a little bit of a different – LSU. That was a little bit different. You know, Mike McGlinchey was making his first career start, but he was a redshirt sophomore, not a true freshman or redshirt freshman. But those are things that they did to get early confidence, and they were able to stay in that game, in a game that a lot of people didn't think they had a shot at, Ryan.
Yeah, well, CJ Prosise had that long touchdown on the jet
yards,
too in that game, right? So yeah, I mean, there's ways fundamentally to get the ball in your playmakers' hands, and I think that Mike Denbrock has showcased that, like, if he has a team that has a dynamite passing attack, he can fold into that. If he has a dynamite running attack, we've seen that literally at the University of Notre Dame, right? So he has those. He's a very versatile play caller. I'm just calling him a playmaker. Maybe back in his day he was, but not anymore. Versatile play caller. But I think that when you look at this offense, this is the first Notre Dame team that I can remember in a long time. And I don't think this I don't think it's hyperbole at all, but this is literally the first Notre Dame team at the skill positions that I can remember in some time, where if I put in all the second stringers, quote unquote, onto the field, I would be like, keep doing what you're doing. Like, I expect the same results. And that has not been the case, man. There's been some years where it's like, if one wide receiver gets hurt, if one running back gets hurt, if one quarterback gets hurt, you're like, snap, son, we suck. Right? Like, it's not good now.
Yep.
It's like
2022, you lose Tyler Buckner, you're holding on for dear life all year. You know,
if we just go by the depth chart, and let's say in theory, there's a play where, and God forbid, where there's a hamstring issue. I know that we're going to bring back some bad injury.
Let's say this, Ryan. Let's say there is a mass equipment issue at your skill positions.
Right.
All 3 starting receivers, all starting running backs. So Jeremiah Love, Jordan Faison, we're just going with the depth chart. Jaden Greathouse and Bo Collins are off the field. Ryan, who are you trotting onto the field at that point in time?
Well, I was going to illustrate it like this, and I wasn't even going to go deep into the running backs because we already know that, like, Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price are both really talented. But, like, just at wide receiver, if all 3 had to come out for whatever reason, and you're telling me that I have to run a full offensive series or full half of football with Jaden Thomas and Jordan Faison and even Jaden Harrison in the slot, just based upon what it's, or Chris Mitchell, whoever that you're throwing in at the Z, it's a long day, right? I mean, like, you have more than enough playmakers. This is the deepest wide receiver room that Notre Dame has had in 5-10 years. I mean, like, it's been a long time.
And your depth at that point in time, your depth is Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, Deion Colsey, Logan Saldate. Oh, and by the way, you do have a lot of tight ends you can throw the ball to. I mean,
and what other years in the recent past would a Cam Williams not be on a 2 deep? Like,
100%.
when would that happen? When would that happen?
And same with Micah Gilbert, 100% correct. 100% correct. And I mean, the last couple of years, we've been, crossing our fingers, wishing upon a star that, that Deion Colsey would finally break out. And now it's like, well, if he does, great. If he doesn't, they're fine. It's a completely different thing. And that kind of ties into the final key to victory, in my opinion, for Notre Dame guys. I don't believe that Notre Dame is going to be able to come out in this game and just consistently go on 8-play drives, run the ball down their throat, quick game them to death, nickel them, diamond up and down the field, and score a bunch of points. They're going to have to generate some big plays in this game. And part of it's obviously your talent, but this kind of plays off of getting them on their heels, using your motions, using your leverage, use some post-snap switch concepts, which worked against Duke last year, which works, I think, especially against this team this year because of not only their personnel, but also the fact that these guys are all learning a new defense, a very different defense from what they ran in the past, very different coverage structures, things along those lines. Can you do some things to kind of create some minuses? I think back to Mike Elko's first year at Notre Dame. What was one of the big factors that for Georgia in beating Notre Dame? They had 2 really big plays. One was on a go ball to Javon Weems late in the game. And you guys remember that jet sweep to DeAndre Swift that got outside for a big gain as well. It was the only really big gain they had to flip the field in a 20-19 ball game. Those 2 big plays turned out to be huge for Notre Dame. So, Ryan, when you look at this post-snap switch, attack vertically, go after the safety. I mean, there's all types of ways you can go with this, but at the end of the day, Notre Dame is going to have to be able to generate from a coaching standpoint and a player execution standpoint some chunk plays in this game. I'm not talking like 1 or 2. I'm talking more like 4 or 5. Just big play opportunities that completely change the flip the field, change the tempo, change the momentum, quiet the crowd. It serves all types of purposes. It's a must in this game.
Well, I don't think you recruit guys like Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, and bring in guys like Chris Mitchell and Jaden Harrison to not create big plays, right? Like, that's literally the whole reason that you bring in those types of guys. And then I would also say, even just like conversely to what Texas A&M is trying out there, we know that their defensive line is super talented and very good. We know Torian York, an inside linebacker, is probably going to be a star. But the secondary is the spot that I look at and say, like, there could be opportunity there, man. Like, Tyree Chappell's a solid player. Bryce Anderson's talented. They got a couple young guys like Des Ricks and a couple transfers that came in that are like talented players. But like overall, Chris Mitchell, Jane Harrison, Jane Greathouse, Bo Collins, you should have opportunity. Eli Raridan, Mitchell Evans, Jeremiah Love out of the backfield. Like, there should be a lot of potential to make explosive plays, especially in the passing game. Because I do look at the Texas A&M secondary and I'm just like, that's easily the weak spot of the defense. I mean, the first level's great. The second level's good with Torian York. And then the third level, question marks, right? So Notre Dame needs to create some big plays, especially in the passing game.
And another thing, too, it feels like the overall vibe of the offense is changing. In years past, especially last year, when Notre Dame needed a big play, they were almost looking for the right opportunity, and it was almost like a paralysis by analysis, just waiting to see if you're able to establish enough of a run game to go play action behind it, have a deep cross with Chris Tyree. They hit that a couple times throughout the year. With Mike Denbrock back in South Bend, it feels that Notre Dame is going to be, for a lack of better words, more on the offensive to create those opportunities instead of waiting for them to happen, which I'm excited to see on Saturday night.
Well, it's Trevor, it was like they would kind of poke and prod and wait for their moment, right? Where Mike Denbrock has preached in practice and in different situations, hey, we're going on the offensive, right? We're going to not poke and prod and wait for that 1 or 2 big play opportunities. We're going to go on the attack. We're going to just come at you, and generate those plays. And the big thing to me that also is going to help this game, I'm actually someone who's not like abandon 12 personnel. I'm like, look, you got Eli Raridan and Cooper Flanagan on your depth chart along with Mitchell Evans. Use 12 personnel effectively. But there also comes an aspect of this where you've got to spread them out too. You've got to make them defend the entire width of the field, something that Notre Dame has not done. And I believe it's something you can do with 12 personnel. especially with a guy like Mitchell Evans and a guy like Eli Raritan who can stretch the field in different ways. You've got to be able to do that. You've got to hunt. And that's something that they didn't do. They would kind of, set up traps to maybe get that one where these guys are like, we're hunting for those big plays. And the one thing that Mike Denbrock walked into was a roster that has plenty of those type of players on it. And not in theory, not, hey, he did this in high school. There's not a guy that Notre Dame is counting on tomorrow that hasn't done this at the collegiate level, right? They're starting, the transfer X receiver has generated big plays on the road in an SEC stadium. Chris Mitchell did that last year at Arkansas when he, went for 6 catches and 157 yards against Arkansas last year. I mean, so you have those type of guys. You have players you can do it. Jeremiah Love, we've seen him do it. We've seen Jadarian Price do it. We've seen Jaden Greathouse do it. We've seen Jordan Faison do it. We've seen Bo Collins do it. We've seen Jaden Thomas do his thing. He's not a big play guy, but he's as far as like yardage. But what we've seen from Jaden Thomas is he's a big moment guy. And that's a part of this as well. So plenty of weapons. And I didn't even get into the tight ends. Plenty of weapons at those positions. And then, of course, you've got the quarterback. Is Riley Leonard going to have to be a facilitator in a lot of these big plays as well. But he's also going to have to create his own as well in this football game. But the more he can facilitate those big plays, get the ball where it needs to get to on time, accurately make good decisions, then there's less pressure on him to be the playmaker. And that's going to be an important part of this game. Ryan, before we move over to the defense, are there any other things that as you look at this game, you say this is something the Notre Dame offense is going to have to do besides, obviously, we talked about fast starts. We talked about the offensive line has to hold up. We talked about, using all your repertoire to get Texas A&M on its heels and then creating big plays. Any other things from the Notre Dame offense that you're going to have your eye on to say, hey, look, this is going to tell me this team is ready to roll and win this game?
I mean, you mentioned it already briefly there, but I really think that Riley Leonard, although, yes, he needs to be an extension or a facilitator in the passing game, you brought him in to be playmaker, man. Like, he came in to be a guy, and there's going to be a moment in this game, whether they're up, whether they're down, whether it's in the late stage of the fourth quarter, whether it's in the late stage of the second half or the first half, whenever it's going to be, there's going to be a moment where Texas A&M sells out. They have good coverage across the board, and Riley Leonard's going to have to make a big play with his legs. Like, there's going to be that moment. And when he has that opportunity, need him to make it, because ultimately that is a backbreaker for defenses. We have Mike Elko on that side of the ball. Obviously, I know Brian's favorite Jay Bateman will be calling the defense technically, with the air quotes up there, but we have what should be a really good defense with a really great defensive mind at the helm. And ultimately, you're going to have to break their back at some point, man, because at some point, if Nick Scourton, Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart, David Hicks, all these dudes have kind of just put they're kind of just pushing to create big plays in the backfield, and all of a sudden, Riley Leonard keeps it, and then he breaks it for a 25-yard big play in a 3rd and 7 conversation, then that's a backbreaker. So I think Riley Leonard is going to be a huge key in the biggest moments of this football game.
How about you, Trevor?
We talked about it a little bit when we were covering the offensive line. One of the biggest things that I'm going to be looking out for is eliminating pre-snap penalties, drive killers, things that kill momentum, control what you can control, and that is one of them. All of the positive things that we're hearing about Mike Denbrock's new offense, and it's going to be aggressive and looking to push it downfield and increase the tempo, is fantastic. But Notre Dame has to do a really good job of not playing out of control. And to me, one of those signs is false starts, whether it's on a wide receiver, whether it's on an offensive tackle or a tight end. Interested to see how Riley Leonard handles all of that communication, making sure that everybody is set before the snap. Marcus Freeman, Mike Denbrock, they touched on it in a press conference at the end of fall camp, where they noted that from the beginning of fall camp to the end, that had increased severely in a positive direction, but have to make sure that in a game scenario that those are eliminated, because that's on the road. That is what kills drives.
Yep.
So we're going to move on to defense next, fellas. But before we do, everybody hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And when this show's over, run over to boards.irishbreakdown.com and sign up for what we got going on there on the premium the premium board for Irish Breakdown. Let's dive into the defense, fellas, and this is the side of the ball where I think Notre Dame has the advantage, and I think it's a pretty significant advantage. But you now need to execute and make sure that the on-paper advantage and the perceived advantage becomes a practical advantage, and that's really going to be an important part of this game because I don't know that Notre Dame can win this game if the defense takes a step back or doesn't bring it, which we saw a couple of times last year. I mean, that's going to happen, right? Nobody's elite for 12 games in the regular season. You're going to have your off games. And the problem Notre Dame has had is when their defense did take a step back, their offense wasn't good enough to pick them up like the way that the defense would pick up the offense when they had their down games. So the defense is going to have to play to its capabilities in this game, especially early. And it really starts up front. And it's not just because, well, football's won in the trenches, and it's not just because, it's just about this is what this team is about. When this D-line plays well, Ryan, you and I talked about it all year last year. When this D-line plays well, you aren't moving the football on Notre Dame. When the D-line didn't play well, that's when they would get in trouble. You've got a big, massive offensive line that you can't allow to get into a rhythm. You may have potentially 3 new starters for them in this game: center, right guard, right tackle, depending on, who they finally go with at center. Obviously, Mark Naboo started last year. They're talking about the kid from Utah is number 1 on the depth chart this year. You've got the Kansas transfer, Adams Reed's at right guard, and Reuben Father's hurt, so it looks like they're going to go with Crown over at right tackle. At least that's what the depth chart says. So they're going to have their own new set of starters in there as well.
Right.
Can't let them get confidence, Ryan. The front, the Notre Dame front has to dominate the line of scrimmage, which means don't let them run the football. Don't let Connor Wegman get into a rhythm, because if they can force A&M to be in a lot more passing downs, I don't know that they have much of a chance to move the ball and score. But if they stay on schedule, if they stay ahead of it, get into second and short, get into third and shorts, that's where that offense can feast, because now Colin Klein has his whole repertoire, play action, movement, all that stuff, quarterback run, screen game. It's all there for him to go to if you get in those downs, and you've got to get him into pure passing downs, because that's where his offenses have struggled in the past.
Well, I would say this too, is that we've spent so much time, obviously, on the Notre Dame side of things, but even the national side of things, talking about Notre Dame's offensive line and the 6 career starts and Anthony Knapp and all those types of things. People have forgotten that, like, Texas A&M also has a lot of questions on their offensive line as well. I mean, like, we just haven't talked as much about that. Trey Zune is a good player at left tackle, but he might be the only player that is playing the position that he started at last year for the majority of the season, right? Because even Chase Besantis is moving to left guard and from right tackle, where he played mostly as a true freshman. So this is a new offensive line, for lack of a better term. Like, this is a first game in a new alignment of an offensive line, and Notre Dame is bringing back one of the better interior duos in college football with Howard Cross and Riley Mills. They're also bringing in RJ Oben. They also have Jordan Patelho, who's hopefully going to take a nice step, but they also have Boubacar Traore and Joshua Burnham. And this defensive line is one of the best in the country. And Texas A&M offensive line could end up being a solid to good units by the end of the season. I think they have that type of upside, but not game one. Game one, they're going to have the same inconsistencies that we're talking about with Notre Dame, as far as, like, there's going to be some miscommunication at times. Maybe there's going to be some pre-snap stuff. There's going to be some jitters. There's going to be some nerves. Like, that stuff is going to be there for the Texas A&M offensive line. You have a clear advantage up front. Notre Dame needs to take that and make the pundits, the analysts, and everybody out there saying Notre Dame's defensive line should dominate the Texas A&M offensive line. You need to make them right. If Notre Dame's defensive line does not, I don't want to say destroy, if they don't dominate this football game, or at least win handedly against the offensive line, then that's trouble for Notre Dame. That means that Notre Dame probably didn't play a very good football game defensively. So they need to show that their strength is a strength, and that their strength is a strength over the Texas A&M offensive line in this game.
Trevor, I'm going to kick part 2 to you, because this ties into it, and it's something that you and I have talked about. Step number 2 to me in this game kind of involves the line, but also the linebackers. And that is when breaking down Colin Klein. You talked about it in your article today. You and I have chatted about it. He is great at using multiple tight ends, motion shifts, 2 backs, and doing things to create extra spacing, extra gaps, extra, they call it surface area, right, in the run game. And then using that where they put 2 tight ends to one side, motion to that side, and they're running away from it, right? You cannot allow yourself to get out leveraged by Texas A&M, and you have to be disciplined. I think that's really the only thing that could prove to be a kryptonite to this front seven is if they are allowed, if they don't handle those things well. So if it just comes down to mano a mano, like Ryan said, I think this Notre Dame D line handles this matchup. And they've played against really big offensive lines before and been fine because they're athletic. That's the concern right there, right? Is don't let Colin Klein do to you what we talked about, what Mike Denbrock needs to do to the Texas A&M defense, which is use motions, use shifts, use personnel to create mistakes or alignment mistakes, assignment mistakes, execution mistakes, whatever, that can then generate the big plays for them.
The majority of my concerns in the front seven live in the linebacking core. And again, not from a skill set perspective. They're longer this year. I believe that they're more athletic this year. But with how complex Colin Klein's offense is, very similar to how complex Mike Denbrock's offense is, especially pre-snap. It's going to be very important that they play assignment correct. To your point, don't get out leveraged. Don't put yourself in a scenario where you're out of position too much. In an ideal world, they play a perfect snap or play a perfect game on every snap, right? But minimize the mistakes and make sure that you don't get out leveraged. That to me is the biggest thing, because once you get into that position, Colin Klein, Connor Wegman, they're going to start getting into a rhythm, which is dangerous, especially being on the road.
Let's dive into point number 3, Ryan, because these all, I think, segue perfectly into each other. What does all of that mean that we just talked about? Defensive line dominating, being gap sound, not letting them out leverage you, not letting them outnumber you, not letting them kind of pin you inside on one of their toss plays or their counter plays or things like that. As I'm watching Colin Klein's offense from last year, run game wise, he's a very creative play caller in the run game. He's very creative when it comes to sneaking out his fullback on a power action into the black and run a corner route for a big play where you're like, how did that guy get that wide open? I mean, that's a lot of their tight end led their team in catches last year, Ryan. I just counted in the 5 or 6 games I broke down, 12, 13 catches at least. Now he's catching the ball out of the backfield as almost like he's a fullback or in a wing position.
Kansas State has done that forever, even without him. You
Yep.
remember like the Gronkowski brother that averaged like 20-something yards a catch as like a H-back fullback? Like it didn't make any sense. Yeah.
But it comes down to this, Ryan. It's don't let them get cheap yards. Make them earn everything. No turning guys loose. No missing tackles. If you get a guy in space, bring him down. No, overrunning plays. No turning a guy. You have to make them go on long drives, because if they have to sustain long drives against this defense, they're just not going to score a lot. What A&M is going to need to do is generate big plays, just like Notre Dame. Both offenses are going through a lot of similar things. So if you're Notre Dame, Ryan, make them work. No cheap yards. That's huge in this game.
I mean, because there's only a couple guys in this Texas A&M offense that I would call like guys that can create big plays ultimately, right? Like you got the Cyrus Allen kid. You might have the Terry Bussey kid, who's the true freshman, the 5-star. Other than that, Noah Thomas is a 6'6" outside. I mean, like he can run a double move occasionally, but like he's a possession guy. Like he's going to win a lot of contested catch situations. Ja'Day Walker, 6'4". You have a couple good tight ends, but like, again, you're talking about guys that are more what the impact they create is going to be before the catch and at the catch more than after the catch. Like you just don't have that ton of guys at running back. Le'Veon Moss is a really tough physical runner, but like he's not a game breaker. Like he's not a guy that's going to bust off like a 60-yard run more often than not. So for me, it's like you have an offense that I think is lacking in a lot of big playability, at least from a full spectrum perspective. Can't let him create big plays in this football game, right? Like there's 2 guys that if I'm Notre Dame, I'm really worried about creating big plays on this offense. That's it. And one of the guys, I have no idea how the heck they're going to use him. Like I have no idea what Terry Bussey is going to do on Saturday. 0. So, but those are the only 2 guys I look at, him and Allen, and say like that guy might be able to create a big play on me, might be able to create an explosive. Otherwise, if Benjamin Morrison at some point gets out leveraged for 50-50 ball against Noah Thomas, that's fine, man. Like, it's okay, right? Because the guy's 6'6". I mean, ultimately, but you got to make everything hard and got to make everything difficult. No easy ball, no bad misses in space that let a guy go for 60. No second effort runs. Like, keep them what they are ultimately, and that should be a methodically oriented offense that is not an explosive offense on paper.
And I don't know that they can beat Notre Dame that way unless the Notre Dame offense just gives them points. I really don't think that they can. Here's the last piece, Ryan, because I don't think you're going to completely shut this offense down where they don't move the ball, they don't cross midfield. You just completely obliterate them the way that they did teams like Pitt and Wake Forest last year. They're going to have some drives that get into your territory. 2 years ago, Notre Dame had one of the worst red zone defenses in college football. They were only a spot away from having the absolute worst red zone defense. Completely flipped the script last year. They had a top 5 red zone defense. So what they were second, right, in red zone, and then what were they, second or third in red zone touchdown, or the other way around? Easy top 5 red zone defense. And they did it all year. What's the truth, right? Like which one's truer? Is the truth somewhere in the middle? I think that's going to be a big key in this game too, Ryan, because if they do get a couple early drives, as you're getting used to the motions and shifts and the movement and the tempo and all those different things, how they're going to use this guy, how they're going to use this guy. If they do put some drives together, they do hit a couple big plays. Make sure you don't let those big plays result in touchdowns, right? They get a 40-yard gain that flips the field, fine, but hold them to field goals. Red zone defense is going to be huge in this game because when they do put those drives together, you got to hold them to 3. When I look at this game, Trevor, that's going to be a big part of it. Is if it may take them a little bit to get used to what this offense is going to do. There are some players that can hit some big plays. If you do make some mistakes, make sure they don't get to 6. And when they get into the red zone, hold them to field goals. If this becomes a situation where Texas has 5 or 6 scores and they're all field goals, so flipping what? Notre Dame's going to win the game. That's a big, big part of this game, especially early on if they're able to hit a couple plays.
Yeah, continuing their dominance in the red zone is going to be huge. Let's be realistic. As awesome as it would be to say they're not even going to cross the 50-yard line, they're going to. It's just going to happen. So being able to play assignment correct, sound football once they get into your territory, I think is going to be crucial. Notre Dame had a really good red zone defense last year. They return a lot of the key pieces on that defense this year. The interesting thing for me for Notre Dame's defense is almost on the flip side of Ryan's point about how big their receiving core is how they're going to fare in the red zone specifically. I like Benjamin Morrison. He has shown that he can play against bigger receivers in the past. Marvin Harrison Jr. was 6'4", and we all know what he did, a whole lot of nothing against Notre Dame when they went to South Bend. But 6'6" is pretty big, and historically Cam Hart was that guy. Cam Hart was long. He was 6'3", and right now your tallest corner is Leonard Moore, I believe, at 6'2". So going to be interested to see how they handle that. But handling yourself in the red zone, field goals are always going to be wins.
So that's the defensive breakdown, guys. Again, it's a very, very big game for Notre Dame in many, many ways. And when you are playing in this type of big moment, your best has to play at its best. And the best part of Notre Dame is what we know right now is its defense. And so they're going to have to get that. And I think this is also a great momentum builder for this team too. And honestly, this is the side of the ball that I do have the most confidence that will play well, if I'm being honest, because it is so experienced. And because there is so much continuity, this is the one part of both teams. 3 new coordinators out of 4. The only thing that didn't change this last offseason was Notre Dame's defense. And I think that's the why I do believe that it is. And what is it, Ryan, that you said? Was it that you said this to me or during the show or when we were talking earlier? Defense travels, right? I mean, and that's got to be true for this game. So that's going to do it for the keys to victory. We'll get into predictions next, folks. But before we do, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. And as always, make sure that you have signed up at boards.irishbreak.com for our premium membership. So final section of the Notre Dame Texas A&M show is going to be predictions. We have talked about the game all week, and now we're going to have some fun making our predictions. So we're going to go into that first, guys. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of each of these guys is going to get their shot to make their prediction. They're going to kind of tell you how they think the game is going to play out, while they do that, we want to hear from you all. What are your score predictions for this game? So we're obviously going to pull some of those up and dive into those. We'll also have something on the message board where we get into this as well. So give me your score prediction. Then I'm going to ask one follow-up of each of you after you get up your score. So give me the score and then tell me how you think the game is going to play out. And then I'm going to have one follow-up question for each of you. Ryan, we'll go ahead and kick things started off with you.
Yeah, so for me, I see this game being a very competitive contest for the most part, but I do have a 28-17 final victory. And how I get to the 28-17 is I think that this game is going to be kind of one of those back and forth dogfights throughout probably 2.5 quarters. And I think that both teams are just going to kind of do the back and forth blow. I do think that Notre Dame could they're probably going to score first in this football game. And I think that would be a great indicator of what the final potentially could be. But I do think that they are going to be kind of a back and forth contest. But what I think the difference is going to be is in the fourth quarter, it's going to be 21-17. And then Notre Dame is going to rip off a huge play. And I don't know if that's going to be Riley Leonard. I don't know if that's going to be Jeremiah Love, but I'm predicting a big play in the fourth quarter that gives you an 11-point lead and lets your defensive line now get a little loose. Your cornerbacks get a little loose. And that's when I think that you're going to see the most harassment of Connor Wegman in this passing attack is going to be in the fourth quarter when you've established an 11-point lead. Texas A&M now has to spread it out. They got to throw the football. They're not going to be a run-centric oriented team. 28-17 final for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish.
Okay, Ryan, here's my follow-up for you. At the end of the game, you're in the locker room. You're celebrating. Notre Dame's got a 28-17 win. Mm-hmm. Who gets your game ball?
I mean, I think it's going to be a collective of the defensive line is going to end up getting the game ball. I mean, if I had to throw one just for like the big play, I would say Riley Leonard offensively is the guy that gets the game ball for making a big play when they needed it most. I do kind of trend towards that fourth quarter big play that I keep talking about. Is probably going to be in the hands of Riley Leonard, whether that is as a runner or making a big play in the passing game. So I'll say Riley Leonard, but I do think it's an assist to the defensive line because I wouldn't be shocked if at the end of the football game, we're talking 5-ish sacks on Connor Wegman and a lot of harassment, a lot of that happening in the fourth quarter when Texas A&M has to kind of open things up and has to try to play a little bit of catch up. So I'll say Riley Leonard is the quote unquote MVP of the football game, but the defensive line gets a big pat on the back for the effort they have.
So you're saying Marcus Freeman might hand that game ball to Riley Leonard, but in the eyes of Ryan Roberts, that game's going to come down to the Notre Dame defensive line dominating.
Yeah, well, I mean, Riley's not going to get it to the defensive line, right? He's going to give it to like Knapp probably or one of his offensive linemen. But yeah, I will give I'll be in the post-game show talking about how I think the Notre Dame defensive line closed this game out and they were the difference of the biggest moments.
Love it. Love it. So Ryan, that's Ryan's prediction, 28-17. Let's go next to you, Trevor. What is your score prediction for the game, and how do you see this game playing out?
Absolutely. So my score prediction for the game, I have Notre Dame winning 34-17. Now, I don't know if it's because there's love in the air for me this weekend or if it's because I watched the Here Come the Irish documentary this morning, but I am juiced up, okay? One thing that you guys will get to learn about me is I love to draw analogies and I love to make references to past years, past teams. And I know it came at a different time of year, but this game has a 2012 Oklahoma feel to it for me specifically. Heard nothing in 2012 except for Bob Stoops and the Oklahoma team and how they're bigger and they're faster and they're stronger. If you guys remember, in 2012, it was a 10-6 game at halftime. It was a stalemate in the third quarter. And then Notre Dame won 20-7 in the fourth quarter alone. I think we pull away late. I think it is very much a 17-14 type game at halftime. I think the first half is going to be full of big plays. And I think Notre Dame's offense outscores Texas A&M 17-3. I think the defense digs in the second half. I think they start to show their star power and why they are considered one of the best teams in the nation. Offense is going to settle in. And I think Riley Leonard's going to have a big game for Notre Dame.
If I remember correctly, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't sorry, Trevor, I did not get your score up. That's still Ryan's score. I want to see Trevor's score. There we go. Boom, right there. So 34-17. I believe Notre Dame was almost a touchdown underdog against Oklahoma back in 2012, weren't they? Even though they were a top 10 team, I think that was number 5 versus number 8. They had a loss already. Oklahoma had a loss already. and I think they were number 8. Notre Dame was number 5. So
Mhm.
Notre Dame was the higher ranked team, and they were an underdog on the road. And Notre Dame ended up turning out all right for Notre Dame. So despite the angst from some fans about Notre Dame being an underdog in this game, this is why they still play the games, fellas, because just because you're the underdog doesn't mean you're going to lose that game. And I like you said, though, what the D-line played great. You forced turnovers. You got off to a pretty good start. Like all those things factored in. And what was the thing that sparked him at the end of the game? Notre Dame answers with a big play to Chris Brown after Oklahoma ties it up. And you both said they kind of wore him down late. I think you guys both nail it. I'm going to give my prediction here now, fellas. And I've been back and forth on this. I'll be honest with you. I think I even gave you a different score, Ryan. I think I gave you like 24-13. At one point, I was 31-13. Then I was 27-10. I've been all around the place because I often do my predictions on what I think should happen, not what I think will happen. And I ended up kind of settling on what I think will happen as opposed to what should happen. I'll say this. If all the keys that we talked about, fellas, come true and Notre Dame does all those things, this won't be an overly competitive game, in my opinion. I think Notre Dame has the better team. They have the more experienced team, the more veteran team. There's less turnover that these teams are that Notre Dame is dealing with, coaching-wise, culture-wise, roster-wise, all of that. This is a game that Notre Dame should win and win handily if it was just played on paper. But unfortunately, the game is not played on paper. This game is going to be played practically, and it is the opener. It is going to be played away from home. There is going to be noise. We saw the Duke game last year. Notre Dame actually moved the ball pretty well early against Duke last year. They just kept stupid false starts, kept killing drives. So you've got to avoid that kind of stuff. And I think those type of things are why this game is going to ultimately be a little bit closer than maybe it should be if we were just looking at the specific matchups and the specific key. So I have Notre Dame winning 24-16. Trevor, who gets your game ball? I don't think I asked you that. Who gets your game ball if Notre Dame wins the way that you have them winning?
I'm in the same boat as Ryan. I think it goes to Riley Leonard, the only offensive captain that the team has this year. I think there is going to be at some point in the game, whether it's to spark, call it a fourth quarter rally to really start stretching their legs. But Riley Leonard is going to have a Sports Center-esque top 10 type of play that gets the team going and puts the nail in the coffin.
I love it. I'm going to go a little outside the box because I don't want to just do what you guys did. You guys did great picks and you guys kind of gave the most likely answers, but I'm going to go outside the box a little bit. I think it's going to go to Jack Kaiser because I think at the end of the day, what we're going to see in this game is Jack Kaiser is going to have some sort of big game-changing play that's going to completely change the direction of the game. It's going to be something of forcing a turnover, recovering a ball, lots of tackles, lots of plays, and I think it's going to be something like that. That's going to be the ultimately determine the outcome of this football game. So, Trevor, I'm going to go with Jack Kaiser, but I think I'm with you guys. If they're going to win this game, then we're going to need to see something from Riley Leonard. There's no doubt about it. So that's where it's going to be. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, Trevor. How much are they going to be able to execute the keys to victory that we talked about? Can they start fast? Can they control the crowd? Can the offensive line hold its water? Can the defensive line dominate? Do they take advantage of their apparent advantages from a skill standpoint? All those type of things. Or is this going to look like what a lot of Notre Dame fans fear, which is, they don't play well in quote unquote these moments. And that's what it's going to be, because at the end of the day, we've done all the talking and now it's time to see what they can do. So it's going to be a fun one. So that was, and then of course, that's the second biggest news this weekend. Notre Dame, Texas A&M will be the second biggest news this weekend. Of course, the biggest news is by the time we get to our Tuesday show, you will be a married man. And so I'm going to welcome you to the club. Ryan's a part of the club. My next guest, Bill Bender's part of that club. And this weekend, you will be part of that club. So congratulations to you and your fiance. Tell her welcome to the Irish Breakdown family as well. And hopefully you are in a good mood on Sunday.
I promised her that no matter what, I would be in a good mood on Sunday. No promises on Saturday night.
So you can make it till you can. Hopefully you won't have to fake it till you make it on Sunday. So that'll be a good thing. So Trevor, anyway, congratulations, man.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you here again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So next that's going to wrap up the Irish Breakdown show. So we did our keys to victory. We did our score predictions. You guys can keep throwing in your predictions. And before we get to our next section, of course, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. And as always, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So let's dive into the final part of today's show, and I am joined by my guy, Bill Bender of Sporting News. Bill, I know it's been a busy week for you. You've got kid duty, dad duty, but also week 1 of the college football season I know has you super busy, man. But I appreciate your time, and I am ready to rock and roll because we are kicking this season off right, Bill, with some big-time football games this weekend.
Yeah, and obviously familiar with us at Irish Breakdown. It's been a wild week. My wife is down at the Eucharistic Congress in Charlotte, so that's dad duty with Grant and Bella. Grant has his first scrimmage tonight, and then his first game next week. So yeah, it's football season. We've managed to juggle the dad duty with the podcast and the radio hits, and I'll tell you this, Brian. All you just said it on that last segment. It's all here. We've done a lot of talking. These games are finally here. I can't wait to see some of these, and I know we're going to zero in on a couple of them for this weekend.
Before we get going, Bill, you heard us talking about the Notre Dame game. Do you have any thoughts you want to share on this game? Because I know you and I talked about this. We have a podcast going up today of you and I and Bill Troche talking about that game. You want to share any thoughts here before we dive into this weekend's real big games? Any thoughts on the Notre Dame Texas A&M game? And then if you want to offer your score prediction, you can.
Was it Trevor that's getting married?
Yes, he's getting married.
I have
Sunday.
some thoughts on that and how he's gonna. Yeah, you said just wait, Trevor. Just wait till the day where you're running from football practice to volleyball practice to getting home, and this time of year I have a very understanding wife, and that's what matters. She definitely knows. She knows I'll be watching Notre Dame on Saturday night, and you and I talked about it on our other podcast with Bill Troche. I keep coming back to what you were saying about the misconception that Notre Dame doesn't win these games. Notre Dame under Freeman 7-4 against ranked teams. It is a tough road environment. It is one of those moments for Riley Leonard where the anticipation is you haven't seen him. I checked the weather. I rarely do that. I do that with Big Ten games in November. 75 degrees at night and 86% humidity. That isn't as bad as I thought it would be, if we're being honest. Like normally when I think of Texas, I think it's going to be 1,000 degrees at night. But how they do that will be a big key, obviously.
So Notre Dame number 7, Texas A&M number 20. That's a big game this weekend, but it is not the only big game this weekend. And so we're going to get into some of the other games that we think are going to be big games from this weekend. And we'll just kind of briefly talk about each game, Bill, what's at stake, how you see the game playing out, and make our predictions. And let's begin at noon on Fox. You have number 8 Penn State at West Virginia. They played this game last year at Penn State. Penn State won convincingly, although not quite as convincing as the final score. James Franklin put one on the board at the end of the game, which I actually didn't have a problem with at the time, to be completely honest with you. But this is a big one because West Virginia was a much better team, in my opinion, by the end of the year than they were at the beginning of the year. This is a big home game for them. This is a big potential statement win for them. They got their quarterback coming back. They have some pretty good returners coming back. Penn State's a team that a lot of people think has a chance to make it to the college football playoff and do some damage in a revamped Big Ten. What are your thoughts on this matchup, Bill?
Well, first of all, it's why I love college football is games like this, the regional feel. I don't know how many of your listeners know. I grew up in, I don't even know how to put it. They call it Southeast Ohio. I kind of call it South Central Ohio because we're not far. We're between Columbus and Athens, essentially. So we're in a part of Ohio where there are West Virginia fans. And when I saw news that there's already traffic jams in Morgantown, I'm not surprised. I know they're going to be rowdy. They're going to be revved up. A name that your Notre Dame fans will know. The last time they beat Penn State was in 1988 when they had Major Harris running around playing quarterback. And he was a name, and from my youth, a very exciting quarterback player. You're right. West Virginia was much better at the end of the year with Garrett Green and the way that they were running the ball. He averaged 17.9 yards per completion last year. So they have that deep threat passing game on top of it. All that said, Penn State dominated this game last year. Drew Aller played very well, and I'm wondering if he'll turn him loose on the road. They have a strong running game, strong defense. We can criticize James Franklin for the big game losses. They haven't lost to they've lost to one unranked team in 3 years, and that was in 9 overtimes to Illinois. They are a little bit of like, Brian, don't you think that means that they take care of business a little bit in games like this?
He's basically the new Brian Kelly, where he's going to win. Like, that's how Kelly was at the end of his tenure. And that's really how Franklin had been. As I think it was 20. They struggled obviously in 20 during the COVID year, and then 2021 they were an up and down team. But those were sort of anomaly seasons. You go back to kind of who they were, and in 19 and 18, like, they're going to beat the teams they're supposed to beat. They're going to struggle beating Michigan and Ohio State. That's their issue. That's what they've got to prove that they can do. These are not games that they lose, in my opinion. And the key for me is it's going to come down to, how good does Phil Troutwine's offensive line play?
Right.
If they play, and it's very similar to Notre Dame. If Notre Dame's offensive line plays well, they're going to not only win this game, I think they win where they're clearly the better team. And I think the talent gap between Penn State and West Virginia is significantly greater, in my opinion, than what it is between Notre Dame and Texas A&M. And so if the O-line plays well and keeps Drew Aller clean, even though I don't love Penn State's receiving core, that's my only potential hiccup for them. It's not a hiccup against West Virginia. It is a potential hiccup when they play Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, USC, teams like that. I don't think it's going to be a thing. I think they roll in this game, Bill. I have them winning similar to last year. I have it being like a 30-17, 30-14 type of game. That's how I see it playing out.
At 31-20. And for those that track, we do the picks against the spread at Sporting News every week. 8.5 point line. West Virginia 6-7 as a home dog against the spread with Neil Brown. But you said it earlier, and it's an inside joke at this point that everybody can see. If it's Penn State by 4 late and they've got a chance to put one in at the end of the game, James Franklin's never shy about that cosmetic touchdown to cover the spread. And I kind of think that's how they're going to do it.
Let's talk about the next game on this list, Bill. And this is more of a hot seat tracker game on one side, and then how good is this team on the other side? And that is Miami at Florida. Not a game that we've seen enough of in our lifetime, to be completely honest with you. One of the big travesties of the scheduling of the last 30, 40 years is the fact that we don't see this game more often. But here it is. You've got, obviously, on one side, Billy Napier is on the hottest of hot seats. And you've got Miami as a preseason top 25 team, despite the fact they've gone, 12-13 the last 2 years, because the portal was good to Miami this offseason. And one thing Mario Cristobal has done well since he arrived was recruit well at the high school level also. So he's not relying only on the portal. But this year, Cam Ward, Damian Martinez are just two of the big names that Miami got. Did lose a couple receivers. Colby Young went to Georgia, but they are going to be loaded. Can he get it all together and get them on the same page enough to go on the road, play a team like Florida, who basically is fighting for their lives? So does this team rally behind their head coach and kind of play like just rabid dogs, or are they kind of ready for this era to be over too and Miami rolls them? That's really the storyline for me, Bill.
That transfer quarterback Cam Ward, one that we're doing our prep for the weekend, and you guys talked about Riley Leonard. I will be watching all these transfer quarterbacks, and there's so many, but the key ones, and Cam Ward's in that conversation as a key player. We've seen him put up numbers at an incarnate word. Let me get that right. At Washington State, and now he comes to Miami, where that's been the missing piece. I think Damian Martinez is probably the more important addition, a real physical runner from Oregon State between the tackles, and can he do that in the swamp? This game, Brian, feels a little bit to me like Utah, Florida 2 years ago, when Utah came to the swamp, and you were thinking everybody was picking the Utes, but then you forget the swamp is the swamp. Still a tough place to play. This is a coin flip game. Billy Napier's heard all this noise all off season. That's TBD because of their November schedule and how absurd it is. I have a feeling that the Gators are going, and you said it, they've only played twice this century in the swamp. Something fluky happens. Block punt, block field goal, something like that. I think the Gators win. I had the score, let's see what I had that score, 30-27 Florida. So plays, sloppiness, special teams weirdness, the Gators find a way at home.
I would love it if you're right about that outcome, Bill. Would love it. And I'm normally root for the ACC in these type of games. I do. I just really despise Miami, and I despise the way they're going about their business. He's very much trying in his weird way to bring back sort of the that swagger. I just don't know that he has it, to be completely honest with you. And everybody, this is like a year. It's like with Texas A&M, right? It was like that with Michigan for a lot of years until Jim Harbaugh actually said, okay, we're actually going to live up to the preseason hype this year. It's that way with Penn State. There's just those programs that every year people are just begging for that team. This is the year, and they're going to keep picking that team until it actually happens, right? And Miami is that new team.
Well, and it's just hilarious that you said that, because I have on my DVR, I have an hour or so before the kids get home. I was going to watch Catholics versus Convicts, the ESPN
Watched
30
that
for
last
30.
week.
It's on because my DVR will catch a 30 for 30 here and there, and I'll delete some of them because I kind of want to watch that to get the mood for that the weekend. You know what I mean? And I was looking at a Catholics versus Convicts T-shirt on one of those random pop-ups on my Facebook, so I wanted to. I can
go grab the one out of my closet. And if you need me to.
I want to buy it and just wear it to my kids, one of my kids' games. But we're all Catholic teams in the diocese, so it might not have the same effect. 100% true though on Miami and how this season we cry wolf a lot. We so desperately want to be. They've won 10 games one time since Larry Coker retired or left, whatever you want to call it. They never.
That's been my point about Texas A&M. Like, Notre Dame doesn't win these kind of games. I'm like, guys, Marcus Freeman's been in Notre Dame 2 years. He has as many 10-win seasons as Texas A&M has in the last 20. Right. And Miami's that same way. What's funny is you look at A&M the last 2 years, Bill, they're 3-7 against ranked teams. And this is going to play into this. I promise you, I'm not getting off tangent here. One of their 3 wins over a ranked team was in 2022 against Miami, who at the time was ranked in the top 25. I believe Miami was 23rd. At that particular time, because there was that whole Miami's back and Mario Cristobal did this at Utah, blah, 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 blah. And so Miami starts the season ranked 16th. They blow out Bethune-Cookman, blow out Southern Miss, and then they went 3-7 the rest of the way and finished unranked. But, A&M's got a win over number 13 Miami. And you're just kind of like, well, what did Miami do to warrant that? Because that was a team that went 7-5 the year before, and they finished that season 5-7. But it's that same thing. Remember a couple years ago when A&M and North Carolina both started in the top 10, and I was like, neither one of those teams are going to sniff the top 10 by the end of the season. But those are just those hot teams, and Miami's that hot team. This is the kind of game that a win, however, starts to change that narrative a little bit, Bill. Not that it completely moves it, because not a lot of people expect Florida to be great. But it's a statement win for them, for their own confidence, for what they're trying to sell their players on. And then, of course, recruiting. It's going to help them in recruiting to be able to go out on the road and get that win in the Swamp. Because Florida's going to have a lot of in-state kids on campus on that Saturday.
Well, and from us, for the national standpoint, those are the games that, and the cynicism kicks in a little bit. For me, it's you pat the winner on the back. Hey, good job. Loser, it's like, that's who we're writing about. The press conference, the what happened, how could you lose this game? Because you're going to feel the heat for the rest of the season. And I could totally see that trend hit about 7:00 on Saturday night.
I'm going to ask you a question before I move on this next game, Bill. Who is more negatively impacted by a loss? Mario Cristobal or Billy Napier?
Billy Napier. And it's close, though, because Miami – they could lose this game and still win the ACC. I mean, the ACC is going to be – ACC could have a crazy perception weekend between that, and I know Clemson and Georgia. And, I mean, even tonight, if North Carolina loses to Minnesota up at Minnesota, and we're all going to say, well, who's going to win that conference? Florida, just from the standpoint we've been talking about his hot seat all summer, they're like I mentioned, their schedule. I'm one of those guys that's like, where are we losing the reasoning here? You can't say somebody has a ridiculous schedule, then get mad if they go 6-6.
Right.
Now they do have to go win some of these games. I think this is a gettable one for Florida at home. And just because it's Miami. And that's one that's going to generate a lot of emotions, whether they win or lose.
He needs a perception win.
Correct.
Big time. And if you get this win, you got Samford coming up the next week. You got A&M at home in 2 weeks. You're at Mississippi State. You're home against UCF. There's a chance they're 4-1 going to Tennessee.
Right.
If not, maybe even 5-0. I think between A&M and Mississippi State, they probably go like 1-1 in those two. If they're a good enough team to beat Miami. But, that's the kind of thing that could maybe salvage it. They desperately need a confidence builder. And if I feel like this game is going to determine the trajectory of Miami or of Florida in a big way. If they lose this game, they're going to go hard. They're going to lose to A&M. They're going to lose to Mississippi State. They may lose to UCF. It's going to go hard. If they win, I think that could be something that really skyrockets them.
I agree.
Let's go to the next game, Bill, and we're going to dive into the USC LSU game. Number 23 USC plays versus number 13 LSU. This game's going to be out in Las Vegas. Notre Dame had one of those games recently in Allegiant Stadium. Sunday night, 7:30. It's going to be an ABC game. LSU is a 4.5-point favorite. Let's talk about USC versus LSU, Bill. This is a huge game, in my opinion, for both teams. And I think it's especially big for Brian Kelly. Take my Brian Kelly thoughts out of it. This is year 3 for him. The perception is that, look, you can't go lose to a team that's considered inferior to you, and USC is considered inferior. And SEC fans will give you the benefit of the doubt if you lose to another SEC team. They will not have such similar doubt if you lose to a Pac-12 team. And you can say USC is a Big Ten team. It's a Pac-12 team in the eyes of their fan base. This is a big – Lincoln Riley needs this kind of win to get his program back on track, to get the swagger back. This is a much bigger game, and it's not being talked about as much as I think it should, because I think this is a huge game for both of these teams.
Wildly entertaining game. And yes, it's an SEC versus a legendary classic SEC versus Big Ten showdown versus with US. That's so weird. I mean, it's so weird to think. I was talking about that at Big Ten Media Day, just seeing the USC logo, and grew up same part of the country. And my dad hated USC. He was a Ohio State guy, as Ohio State, Michigan, those schools hated USC because of those Rose Bowl losses. I remember, my people talking about Charles White and OJ Simpson and just miserable. So
Notre Dame fans have a lot of those stories too,
right? Like
about Anthony Davis and Charles White and OJ Simpson as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, just that Midwest hatred for them. And I think for me growing up, it was the jealousy of, you would watch the Ohio State Michigan game and then you'd be like, it looks so warm during that USC UCLA game, but I digress. Defense, who can play defense here? Danton Lynn, hired by USC. Lincoln Riley emphasized how they missed 6 tackles in the Louisville game, whereas there were games where they were missing 20 and 30 tackles this year. LSU, same deal. They couldn't play defense last year. What is Blake Baker? They hired him from Missouri. Does that clean up their defense? They have some talent. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the SEC. They're going to view this as, we're an SEC team. We should handle West Coast. Whatever you want to label USC, they should handle them, is how they look at it. The approval rating takes into effect here as well. Brian Kelly, I still think the jury's out on how LSU fans view him, even though he's won 10 games each of the last 2 years. I don't think the jury's out on Lincoln Riley at USC. I actually kind of believe him when he says he inherited a mess, and when you had Caleb Williams that first year, it made it look better than it was. And then year 2, it kind of caught up with him. So now they're at a point of where we're at. And a game like this, good measuring stick. I'm excited to watch Garrett Nussmeier and Miller Moss, though. I think both of those guys make some plays. Both played awesome in their bowl games. I got it in a shootout type game. I picked LSU 35-28. That line's a little tricky. If you want to take USC, I wouldn't be angry, but it'll be one of those things. It'll be a lot of fun.
Obviously, DeAnton Lynn was a great hire, but it went beyond that. He hired Doug Belk, who's the DC at Houston, who Notre Dame interviewed for their open D coordinator job when Marcus Freeman took over as head coach. You are Eric Henderson from the St. Louis or Los Angeles Rams. And then you go out in the portal and Deanton Lynn brings in 2 of his DBs from UCLA. You go out and get a Keely Arnold from Oregon State. That's the thing I don't think enough people are talking about is like, look, they got some good football players in the portal this year that are familiar with this. More, they didn't go out and get some kid from SMU or UCF or some kid. They got Pac-12 kids. You know, they got the first team all Pac-12 kid from Oregon State, a linebacker whose name I always struggle to pronounce. The you know, he's got the first name Iman and then the last name it's I can't pronounce that one. But you know, you have him. You still have Mason Cobb coming back, who came in from Oklahoma State. You got a Keely Arnold. You got John Humphrey. You got Kamari Ramsey. And to me, honestly, I think that's going to be a big part of this. Is you have guys that are going to be familiar. You're not just bringing in like Mike Elko had to bring a lot of different portal guys to rebuild that secondary. And Kansas State and UAB and all this play. You went out and got 2 kids that are going to start in your secondary who know your defense. They played for you there. And that's something that helped Mike Elko last year when he got the kid that transferred in from Texas A&M who had played for him at Texas A&M. It helps that transition. And I think that's going to be the biggest difference why I've been a lot higher on USC this offseason than a lot of other people. I also think Miller Moss being the quarterback and not Caleb Williams is going to force Lincoln Riley to go back to maybe scheming people up and not just trying to play hero ball with Caleb Williams all the time. I think
and that can be a good thing.
I think it can be a good thing.
That reminds me of Packers Aaron Rodgers stuff where there was a game against the Bears where he got hurt and had to stay in the pocket and he lit up Chicago in the second half. That could happen in USC's offense, right? Where he has to play on schedule. We know Lincoln Riley's an offensive. I'm not going to use the word genius, but he's very good at it. Like he knows what he's doing. So another transfer to keep an eye on in this game is CJ Daniels with Liberty transfer receiver, LSU, 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns last year. They always find guys that can play outside.
Yep. I mean, Kyron Lacey's going to be good.
Right.
You know, Chris Hilton, if healthy, he's going to be good. They're going to have offensive weapons, and their offensive line is going to be very good. That to me is the ultimate decider in this game. Is can USC's D-line hold up against LSU's offensive line? Will Campbell gave him a little bit of Baltimore material yesterday. You know what I mean?
Well, they got 2 NFL tackles.
Yeah.
You know, Emery and Will Campbell.
Right.
So
their center's pretty good too. And then USC's got talent up front, but their talent hasn't always lived up to the occasion. That's really what it boils down to for me. Does the transfers at USC finally step up and say, hey, we're here to play winning football, not just here to get our paychecks from big NIL deals? That's really what it boils down to.
And I think what do you got?
I got USC winning 34-31.
I like it.
And, you know, I point to last year's bowl game. And, look, I hate looking at bowl games. I do. I hate putting too much into bowl games. But the one thing we saw in that game is we saw vintage Lincoln Riley, which is, hey, I got to scheme this stuff up because I can't ask Miller Moss to put the team on his shoulders. It's got to be more on me. Mm-hmm. And again, bowl game, Louisville had a lot of guys sitting out. I still don't – like USC has to change their culture on defense, but they have really good talent. LSU has to change their culture on defense, and the talent hasn't caught up yet to what it is on offense. That's ultimately what it boils down to for me. I think it's going to be a back and forth game. I've been kind of back and forth on all this. I think USC's O-line is going to be better. I think that they're going to make some big plays, and I think their defense is going to make enough stops. I think their secondary is better than LSU's secondary, which is going to help them pull it out. And I think we're going to see the offensive breakout of Zechariah Branch in this game as well. I think they're going to build a lot around that kid, and he's going to be dangerous this year.
Yeah, I talked to Reggie Bush yesterday as part of a promotion that they have going with him into next week, and he mentioned Zechariah Branch as well. So that's one of those X-Factor exciting guys to win. I like the pick, Brian. I'm not going to get you wrong. I still – and by the way, LSU, 4 straight week 1 losses.
Yeah.
So that would 20, 21, 22, 23. They play – it's not like they're playing – G5 schools here.
They played 2 back-to-back really good Florida State teams.
Yeah, they did. And they lost to UCLA and Mississippi State. They probably want those ones back. But so I think more on, as strangely as people want to say Lincoln Riley hot seat, there's more on the line for LSU here, no question.
Yeah, agree. I think for USC, as long as it's a close game and they battle and then go on a roll, I think people will get over this loss. I think people are going to have a hard time and down south getting over this kind of loss. Because here's the thing, too. You talk about it's a big weekend for the ACC. It could be a big black eye weekend for the SEC if they don't handle business as well. Right. I mean, you catch L's by USC and Notre Dame and Clemson, something like that, then all of a sudden there's going to be some interesting storylines. I don't think those are all going to happen. I don't think they lose all 3 of those. We'll get into that next. But it's certainly a lot. It's certainly a prove it weekend when it comes to the rivalry debate between these teams. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Last game that we're going to talk about, Bill, and that is going to be what I think is certainly the most interesting matchup of the weekend outside Notre Dame and Texas A&M, and that is number 1 Georgia against number 14 Clemson. This is a big game. We've seen this game a lot over the last 10, 15 years. This is not we haven't seen this game in a while. It's going to be Saturday at noon, ABC game. Georgia is a 13.5-point favorite, which shows you just kind of how much the Tigers have fallen off here in recent seasons and what that perception is. Last time these two teams played was I believe the year that Georgia won their first title since Herschel Walker was at running back. Was it for the old Bulldogs? 10-3 game where there's 0 offensive touchdowns.
Yeah, set offensive football back very far when Christopher Smith had the only touchdown in the game for the Bulldogs. I'm excited. I'll ask you the question first. Do we think Carson Beck is the top player in college football?
No, I think he is the starting quarterback who puts up good numbers on the perceived best team in college football.
Yeah, and we talked about this stat yesterday, throwing the ball more than 10 yards or more. I'm going to harp on this all season because it translates to the next level. 11 touchdowns, 5 INTs on those past 10 yards or more. It's not like 20 yards or more. And he loses Brock Bowers and he loses Ladd McConkey. I think everybody on the planet knows that and mentioned it this offseason.
And they also lost the kid that got kicked off the team.
Robert Thomas.
Yeah.
So, okay, you lost all that. Clemson still plays defense.
That's right.
They play. Remember this. I can't equate it to their disaster opener against Duke last year because Clemson in that game, if you remember watching that game, they just had everything. It was one of those Murphy's Law games. Everything went wrong. Bad snap, fumble on a 4th down. They still ran the ball.
Yeah,
they still played
yards.
They still played good D. They just were on short fields and some bad spots. I think Clemson can play enough defense to hang around, but I have the same exact questions about Cade Klubnik that I do about Carson Beck, and probably more so because Clemson, where has their receiver production been the last 3 years?
I think they were going through a transition, and where for a few years they were recruiting guys that I didn't understand why they were recruiting. Like, I'm excited about Bo Collins at Notre Dame. The day he committed to Clemson, I said, I don't get this. I don't get why he committed to Clemson, and I don't get why Clemson wanted Bo Collins. He does not fit what they're trying to do. They need shiftier, faster, speedy guys. The guys that they had that were tall early on when they were winning titles were burners. They were vertical. Joseph Ngata is not that guy. Bo Collins is not that guy. Right. And I just think they've been kind of recruit the highly ranked guys, and they didn't really fit the system. DJ Uiagalelei did not fit that offense. He is a big, long-armed, throw it downfield, big, long delivery guy that you're trying to throw a million screens and things like that. I mean, it wasn't a fit. And then, of course, they've had some really good young players come along the last couple of years that couldn't stay healthy. They're supposed to be healthy now. A lot of those younger players are healthy now, and they are more fit what they're trying to do. The other problem that Clemson's had too prior to last year's, their secondary took a big dip. It got a lot better last year, but then they had some personnel losses, and I'm curious how that secondary is going to hold up this year with a lot of talented new faces in the secondary. But to your point, what Clemson did late last year and what they do now that I think is going to make this a game is they went through a bit of they're not real good on both sides of the lines like they used to be. This D-line is young, but very talented. I watched their 3 freshman defensive line kick Notre Dame's butt last year. When you look at TJ Parker and Peter Woods, and they've got DeMonte Capehart, who's a massive kid who's also young. Peyton Page is another talented young player. That's the thing that kind of gives me pause when thinking about, well, on paper, Georgia's this, and Clemson had 4 losses last year and struggled and did this, and Georgia was the most dominant team in college football against the schedule where they didn't play anybody, and then when they finally did play somebody, he got punched in the mouth and lost. But I think Clemson has the ability to play with them in the trenches. Their line was a mess early last year. Towards the end of the year, had a bunch of young kids in the lineup, and they started playing better. They started running the football. Phil Maffa could could kind of
Right.
run behind that line. They were one of the few teams that really took it to Notre Dame's defensive line last year earlier in that game. I think that's the thing why I think this is a close game. And it comes down to it. Yes, I think Carson Beck's a good quarterback. I don't think he's what people make him out to be, but he's certainly been better than what Cade Klubnik has been so far. And that's going to be the key, is if Cade Klubnik is the key for Clemson. If he can play well, they got a shot. If he doesn't, I think this game is going to be a higher scoring version of the 2021 game.
Right. I got 27-17 Georgia.
Okay. I got 24-17. So we're close.
Yeah, like they tack on a field goal, whatever. But yeah. I think they played out pretty close in the trenches. And in games like that early, they'll play it close to the vest. So it could be conservative early. Then we see which quarterback can open it up. And if you're not like Florida State last week, maybe you open it up before the third quarter. So I think that'll be the key in that game, no doubt.
I like this battle. I do. I think this is going to be a game where even though Clemson, I predict them to lose, I won't be shocked if Clemson pulls off the upset in this game.
Right.
I won't. What I think is going to happen, Bill, is I think this is going to be a very competitive game. And it's going to be a lot like kind of what Notre Dame had against Georgia a couple times, where the perception was Notre Dame has no chance against Georgia, playing at Georgia in 2019. And Notre Dame went down there. They lost. But they had the ball at the end. They had it, inside the 50-yard line. A touchdown wins the game. They couldn't get it done, but they went toe-to-toe for 60 minutes, and people are like, hey, this is a pretty good football team at Notre Dame. I think Clemson has sort of a similar situation in this game where Georgia just has I think their front seven is just too good for Cade Klubnik to all of a sudden figure it out this week. Right. I think he's going to make enough plays to keep this a game, but at the end of the day, I just don't know that he's going to be able to make enough throws down the field to really force Georgia to stay honest. And so I do think it's going to be a little bit lower scoring game, not like it was in 21, but where Clemson battles, it's a competitive game, but Georgia's still the better football team. Now, if Cade Klubnik can make some of those plays and the receivers are able to get back to being, playing Clemson football, then I think they have a shot to pull off the upset. The question that I'm going to have, Bill, is will Dabo allow Garrett Riley to actually call the game that way he wants to call the game?
Not side to side, play vertical a little bit.
Right.
And take their shots when they can. And, and you got an exciting game. Now, and not to change the subject, but I wrote about this game. I talked to the Peach Bowl, it's now the Aflac kickoff game CEO, Gary Stoken, and he's hoping that we continue the trend with these games. This is I think this is the
good feature, by the way, Bill. I thought
you.
There were some very good points made in that about whether or not these type of games will or will not continue.
Well, I'm on the fence with it because as a fan, I want to see it. If I was Lincoln Riley or Marcus Freeman, I'd be hesitant to do it because, man, you're stepping out. Now Notre Dame has to do it, but like if you're Georgia and Clemson, okay, what's the incentive? I love that they're playing it. I think it's going to be a fun environment. And Gary Stoken's a good guy, the Peach Bowl CEO. He's one of those guys behind the scenes that keeps these in our living room and makes sure that the quality is good. I don't like seeing a top 25 where we have 11 teams playing FCS opponents in week one.
Right.
So
there's got to be a happy medium. Play a Power 5 team, but maybe you play Duke instead of Clemson.
Yes.
If you're Georgia, right?
So
or Pitt instead of Florida State, something like
that. I forgot to give you a Notre Dame prediction.
Oh, yes. You
want me to do that now?
Well, let's finish this point here real quick because I definitely want to get your prediction. But here's my thing about those games, Bill, and you nailed it in the article. So for those of people, go follow Bill on Twitter, but go to Sporting News. Obviously, he's got this article on the front page. His thing was it's going to be determined by the committee. And the teams that are considered kind of locks or they're in the competition to play for the league title every year, Ohio State's, Georgia's, I can see them having less incentive. USC is nuts if they think they can just be the third best team in the Big Ten, play no one in the non-conference, and they're going to get the benefit of the doubt in the college football playoff. They're nuts if they think that's going to happen. Let's say they decide to drop Notre Dame. Clemson, Florida State, ACC teams cannot afford to not play these type of games because if you don't win your league, you're the number 2 team in the ACC. You're not guaranteed to make the college football playoff. If you're the number 2 team in the Big Ten or the SEC, you're almost a lock to make the college football playoff. That's not true in the ACC and in the Big 12. So what's going to be interesting is if the SEC and Big 10 bow out of some of these big games, do you then see the ACC and Big 12 say, hey, we got to do some stuff. we gotta partner here together to make sure that we're giving ourselves some of these opportunities. And are those games big enough to kind of, create that outside of the normal rivalries that already exist? And then that puts a lot of pressure on the ACC teams to win those rivalry games. Florida State's got to beat Florida. Clemson's got to start smacking South Carolina. Georgia Tech maybe gives Clemson a game, which they actually did last year. They played Georgia tough last year for a while. So I think this is going to be a very, very interesting game, Bill. And I hope that games like this don't go away. I hope that games like USC and LSU don't go away, because I do think the thing that they're missing that's not being talked about is, if you're scheduling yourself to make the tournament, doesn't mean you're scheduling yourself to have success in the tournament. And if you don't challenge yourself outside of your league, how good do you know that you're assuming that your league is going to get you good enough? But in these 18-team leagues, you can't guarantee that you're going to get a good draw every year of good teams that, yes, you're 12-0 and you make the tournament. But if you haven't played anybody and you're not challenged, and you're playing some 3 or 4 loss team from the SEC who's battle tested, that game may not go how you think it's going to go. And that's the thing that I think people like Lincoln Riley are missing is, hey, are you really sure you're going to be? Because if you look at their schedule, there's not a single year in the next 5 years, I think, where they play Ohio State and Oregon in the same year.
Right.
There's only 2 years in the next 5 where they got to play Ohio State and Michigan in the same year. So they're not playing Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan and Washington every year. It's just, that's not how it's happening. Right. And so you run the risk of saying, hey, we got in, but we're not battle tested. So if it's really about a championship that you're trying to get, like Georgia this year, I could see Georgia going 10-2 and winning the whole thing.
They could. And, Luke Fickell, I asked him a couple questions about this at Big Ten Media Day. I thought he had the best perspective, honestly. I mean, they're playing Alabama. They're the king of college football the last 15 years is coming up to Camp Randall. And he just said, I want it to be advantageous to play in these games, and that also you're given a little bit of a benefit of the doubt if it doesn't go your way, that you're given credit for stepping out. And you saw that in the 4-team era where, like Oklahoma would beat Ohio State. That was a separator in them getting into the playoff, and vice versa. So I thought Luke had a very good feel of it. And he said, now, if we put more teams in the playoff, you definitely want to play in these games because you want to stack it up. If they keep it the same and they don't honor that, I'm wondering if teams will kind of shy away from it. Now, if I was a Power 5, Power 4, or Notre Dame athletic director, and I'm making my team schedule, that September is going to be, well, not Notre Dame for the sake of this conversation because they're not in a conference, but if I'm Big Ten athletic director, I'm playing 2 Group of 5 schools, 1 Power 5 school, varying in degree of difficulty by the year. I can't control what Virginia is from year end. You know what I mean? And then I'm going to go play my league schedule. So I would like to play one game, though, that before I got my league schedule where I actually know where I'm at.
What is your end game playing that way? That's my question. What's your goal for playing a schedule like that? Where basically you're doing the best you can to guarantee yourself a 3-0 non-conference.
Well, not necessarily. I'll play it. I'll step out and play one, but I'm playing 2.
Like Virginia.
That was a bad example then, because I'll play 2 G5 schools and treat that at like my quote unquote preseason, and then I'll step out and play somebody. And my goal from any given year on a schedule, if I'm a Big Ten or SEC athletic director, is to go 10-2 or better, because they can't turn me away then.
Right.
How many 10-2 SEC and Big Ten teams are going to be turned away? I don't think too many. Notre Dame's not getting turned away at 10-2. So if I'm making Notre Dame schedule, same deal. I have my 5 games locked in the ACC. I can't control if Virginia Tech or Duke or whichever one of those teams is good. I can control playing USC.
Right.
I like their Big Ten relationship as it stands. That we're going to see some like Michigan State, Purdue, Michigan, that type thing. I want to go 10-2 because they're not going to turn me away.
What I think could happen for some of these teams is if you have a year where you have Georgia's schedule from last year, not very good non-conference. Now, again, I don't blame Georgia because it wasn't their fault. They scheduled Oklahoma. The league canceled the game. They tried to, but just look at it for what it was, a Michigan schedule last year. If Michigan goes 10-2 against last year's schedule, I do think there's a chance they get turned away. If Georgia goes 10-2 against last year's schedule, there is a chance you get turned away. because I don't think you're necessarily going to get that benefit of the doubt. But that's the point that you made. The committee's going to have to give, I think it's what Luke Fickell was saying. If you go play Bama and you lose that game and you're at least competitive, you can't lose like USC lost in 2016, right?
Right.
But you lose that game and you go into your league and you lose a game and you don't win the league, but you're 10-2. You played a good schedule. You have some very good wins on your schedule. If the committee gives teams like that the benefit of the doubt, even over maybe a team with a better record, you're 11-1, and we're going to see not even so much about getting in or out, but seeding. Hey, we're going to make you 8 and you're going to be 9 or 10, because even though this team went 10-2 and you went 11-1, you played an FCS school, a bad group of 5 team, and Vanderbilt in your non-conference, and this team went and lost in a toe-to-toe ball game for 4 quarters at Notre Dame. Same, you know what I mean?
Right.
So that team is more tested. That team proved themselves. That's how the committee can fix this.
Right.
If the committee wants to make sure that these games don't go away, and then we're having to guess, well, how good is your league really? Because we don't know, because no one in your league tested themselves outside of the league. Then they need to make sure that teams that do that are getting rewarded for that. Not just from are you in or out, that's part of it, but seeding is going to become a much bigger – we've never had this debate in college football, Bill,
Right.
where we care as much about seeding, because it's 1 through 4. It's like, well, you're going to have to play one of these teams anyway, whether you get in the first round or the second round. Now, 8 versus 9 is huge. You're going to be the same team, but now all of a sudden we got to go to their place. 7 versus 10 is going to be huge, because now instead of I'm USC, now I have I can't control that I'm going to go play in Happy Valley in December in the cold. Or if I'm a Southern team, I got to go up to South Bend to play Notre Dame in 15-degree weather, because we didn't schedule ourselves the right way out of conference. So we got dropped from maybe 7 like we thought we should have been to 10 or 11 because we got punished for playing a crap schedule.
I totally agree. And you're exactly right. As we get into this season, and Gary made this point, and Gary Stokan made the same point, that those games are important for 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Mm-hmm.
They're separators for 8 through 12. And we're going to talk endlessly about 8 through 12 this year. The Big Ten champion will probably not get talked about much.
Right.
The 2 teams in the Big Ten championship game, if they wrap that up in early November, it'll be like, oh, I forgot they exist, because they're in there. We're going to spend a lot of time on 8 through 12, and hopefully we remember September in that regard, because this is, the excitement level I feel is the same. It's tonight. I'm ready to rock and roll, watch some of these games and get into it. And I want them to matter in September.
I would push that to 7. I think it's going to be 7 to 12 that gets talked about, because the reason I say that is because if you're 5 or 6, you're playing the expected ACC Big 12 champ. You're 7, now you're playing one of the Big 10 or Big 12 or big SEC champs in round 2.
Right.
You really want to get into the top 6. That's the pathway to getting – that's what we're going to talk about for Notre Dame, for example. Like 5 or 6, you're in a good place, because you're going to play an ACC or a Big 12 team is the assumption, right or wrong, it's the assumption. So if Notre Dame's the 5 seed, they get Memphis or Liberty in round 1, and then they get to play – Oklahoma State or Kansas State in round 2, as opposed to if you drop a game you're not supposed to drop, or let's say that a 12-0 Notre Dame team gets dropped to number 7 behind the loser of the SEC and Big Ten games, because Notre Dame plays this soft schedule, let's just say, where they don't play any good teams. We'll replace USC dropped us. We'll replace them with Wake Forest. Or a bad example, we'll replace them with Baylor, Vanderbilt, Indiana.
Right.
Teams like that. Okay, well, yeah, you went 12-0, but so did Liberty, and they're the 12 seed because you didn't beat anybody, right? So yeah, you've got to test yourself. An 11-1 Notre Dame team that tests themselves has getting that 5 or 6. So because if you're the 7 seed, Bill, you now got to go play the Big Ten champ or the SEC champ in that second round. So I think that's where the cutoff is going to be. If you can get in that top 5 or 6. That's going to be where the debate really comes, in my opinion.
And they're going to be fun. And we're going to have a lot of fun doing it all season. I can tell you that. I mean,
it's
already started. We have one of the things we're curious from an interest standpoint is this idea of college football bracketology. We, as you know, I do the men's and women's bracketology for Sporting News now. The women's was wildly successful last year. And it really does center around those last couple teams. It centers around 1 seeds and last few teams. And so where you just said it's going to be different, I think you're right, is 6 through, because of the game of, and also whether or not the committee tinkers with this idea of rematches. That's something I've been harping on. Let's not watch Oregon, Ohio State again. So we'll put Oregon one more down. That'll drive people nuts. It will happen inevitably, I think, too, on some level.
Yeah, no question. And to try to avoid it, or hey, if it's going to happen, they have to both earn it to get there. Right. So you're not going to put, if Georgia beats Bama in the SEC title game, Georgia's the 1 seed. Maybe make Bama 7-7, 8. Right. So that way, if they win, they don't get it right away the next round. I think we'll be part of that conversation as well. It's going to be fascinating. And then, of course, part of the scheduling thing is if the SEC team champ, let's say Ohio State, they get Bama in a couple years. Let's say Ohio State wins the Big Ten. They go 11-2. Close road loss to Bama. Lose a regular season game against somebody really good. But they win the Big 12 or Big 10. And the ACC champ plays nobody out of conferences, is 12-1. I want to see that Ohio State team, just as an example, since you live in Columbus, I want to see them seated higher than the ACC champ, even though they don't have as good of a record to say. Again, why? Because they tested them, they battled. We know who they are. We're not going to reward you, Big 12 team, ACC team, for going 12-1 or 13-0, and you don't play anybody.
Right.
So that would be the incentive to the SEC Big Ten teams and also the ACC teams to say, hey, listen, this isn't just about whether you get in or not. This is also about where we're going to place you. And if you don't want to test yourself, fine, you'll get in, you'll win your league, you'll get a bye, but don't be mad at us when we make you a 3 or 4 seed.
Correct.
And you've got to play somebody really good in round 2. So I think the committee is going to have such a huge say over all of this. Bill, before we end this thing, we have a couple super chats we'll get to, but any storylines that you've got your eye on as we go into this weekend? And then once you're done with that, I want to get your Notre Dame.
All right. A couple things we'll have on tap is the transfer quarterbacks, how they look. Transfer roulette is interesting. Will Howard, we'll have a lot of eyes on him. We mentioned Cam Ward, Riley Leonard, Aiden Child. It even goes down to like Aiden Childs at Michigan State, Grayson McCall at NC State. How do these transfer quarterbacks have command of their offense? I think there was a whopping, I can pull this stat up really quickly. I just sent it to one of my editors. This was from Ross Dellinger this week. 43 of the 68 power conference schools are expected to start a transfer quarterback. That's staggering to me. It's almost 2/3. And I've just been a firm believer in you get the best out of that transfer quarterback in the second season. So you got to temper expectations in year 1, And if Riley Leonard, like before your other guys, I think it might have been Trevor that said that if Riley Leonard has this moment against A&M, it's almost unfair expectations from there. He's still a first-year transfer in the system. Granted, the expectations are high. Will Howard, same deal. There's a couple more out there. And then guys like even debuts for guys like Dylan Raiola, Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma. I think that always draws. Tonight, I'll be like everybody else. I'm going to watch Dion. We had a conversation with Dion at Sporting News, a couple weeks ago. I sat on that. I will tell you this story, and your listeners, this story about Dion, because I'm never going to forget it as long as I live. Interviewed Dion. It's pretty bare bones. We talked about he defended his portal. He defended his star system, those kind of things. People have opinions on Dion. They're already made up. They're not going to change. But and I'm kind of fair with him. And, Grant, my son, walked behind me. I was in the parish hall at St. Catherine doing this interview because he had practice. And, Dion kind of waved him up and said, hey, how old are you? Talked to Grant for a few seconds. And he said, if you're going to play the game, play in shades. Grant's never going to forget that. Okay. So the guy's human. The guy loves football, and as somebody who's doing this journey with his son through football, it was a pretty cool moment. I will watch them. I know we're going to all react either way. I think they get it done tonight, but we'll see. North Dakota State's pretty good up front too.
Yeah. There's some things Dion has done that I don't like, and that's okay. What bothers me is that everything he does, people just immediately, and I said this was going to happen. He got so much hype in year 1, and it was all intentional, in my opinion, with a lot of people, because the minute he has any failure, they're going to be the first ones there to tear him down, because it's like Notre Dame. You hype up Notre Dame, to get the clicks, and then if they have failures, you then crush them to get the clicks. That's exactly how it goes, man. The latest thing, though, I actually don't have a huge problem with, because obviously on my end as journalists, I don't want coaches to feel like they can just go out there and tell people you can't ask questions. Some of the stuff I read that this guy was writing, this isn't a reporter being a reporter. This is a guy basically trying to take a hatchet to the program every day to get clicks. They didn't ban him for being in a press conference. They said you can't ask questions. I actually didn't have a problem with it, because, like, look, if you're going to report on me, you need to have the freedom to criticize us when needed and praise it. I don't need you to, like, I can't stand when people I've talked to at Notre Dame over the years try to say, well, you shouldn't, this isn't fair. This isn't, this doesn't make, it's my job isn't to make you look good. But when you're just basically taking a hatchet job and you're just writing flame pieces just to try to generate clicks, I don't really view you as a reporter anymore. I view you as basically just somebody that's just, trying to use the stance to go out. So I actually didn't have a problem with that, based on the things that I've read that reporter has put out, because it was clearly you're trying to create animosity to get us to do something or to just make us look bad. And then you want to, cry, woe is me when you get punished for it, because you're not acting in good faith. I'll take criticism if you're acting in good faith. I'll take criticism if you're being true to what your hey, Driscoll said this, and I think he's wrong. Cool. Don't say Driscoll said this, and then I'm going to twist it into something else that I didn't actually say and criticize me for it. I've got no respect for you now. And that was kind of my issue with what this reporter clearly had an agenda. He wasn't just reporting the news of a 4-8 football team.
Well, and it goes both ways, right? Like for me, Dion, when he was berating a reporter a couple weeks ago, I'm like, the reporter, if that's me in that situation, I'm probably going to stop talking at a certain point. I'm like, okay, let Dion win, then he's the bad guy. How I think this should have been handled is Dion probably should have invited Keeler to his office and hashed it out that way behind closed doors. No need to put this on video or Snapchat or whatever, and you handle it that way and be professional both ways. Listen, I feel like you're unfairly criticizing me. You have it easy because you're the writer. You can do these things, and I ban you, and suddenly I'm the one with thin skin. Whereas, at what point does the report, and there are reporters out there, I'm not talking about Sean. I'm just saying in general, there are reporters that have thin skin. I read the comments. I tell people that all the time. I used to be bothered by the comments. I used to get really angry and internalize it and get angry. Now I've been doing this job so darn long that I'll send them to my friends and be like, dude, look what this dude said about me. And they'll lose their mind laughing. They'll be like, did he really? And with you, Brian, I feel like, I know we get going on these podcasts because I've had podcasts with you where I left the podcast really angry. I was like, Brian made me mad. I want to just, he proved me wrong sometimes, because it's like, you'll prove me wrong on something, but I just really didn't agree with his take on that. But I respect your opinion. I always have, even if I don't agree with it. And I think some of that has been lost because of social media. Some of that has been lost because I've gone about my entire career trying to be fair.
Right.
I'm fair. I think you're fair about Notre Dame. I'm pretty fair about Notre Dame. Some emotion creeps in. It always will. Being a Big Ten guy, yeah, it'll creep in there a little bit. And being a Catholic school kid, yeah, it does. But it has to be fair. And I think my article with Dion, the conversation, there is a quote with a headline where he compares himself to Jesus, sort of. And that's the one that got a lot of quotes, but he was laughing when he said it. So context is he's not comparing himself to the Messiah. But he had a point, because if he everything he does is under the microscope, good, bad, in between. And
he wants that. So
he wants it.
When you seek that out, don't get mad when you don't like everything that comes back at you. My thing is, what I don't like is when people take it from an honest assessment. Like, I disliked Brian Kelly. You know that. Everybody knows that. But I tried, in my opinion, my best to be fair. I'll praise him in areas where I felt he needs to be praised, and I'll criticize him in areas when he needs to be criticized in my job. Now, personally, people ask me my opinion about Brian Kelly. You're going to get it. Right. And it's not going to be pleasant. But that's different. And that was my thing with this reporter. I just felt like he was making it personal in order to sort of make a name for himself. And I'm not a fan of that. And people say, like, this is against the First Amendment. No, it's not. You not being able to ask questions because of certain things is not you can still write whatever you want to write. And clearly this guy didn't need quotes from, questions to ask to write hit pieces on Colorado, in my opinion. I'm just using that broadly, not so for him, just in general. Is you can write whatever you want to write. I didn't ban your newspaper. I didn't ban you from the premises. Right. I simply said you can't ask questions. Now, if Deion did this just because the guy predicted them to lose a game, or criticize him for like fair things, like, hey, dude, you deserve blame for this. You went 4-8 last year. That's a different deal. And right. I can. There's a line that you can cross, because on this side of the aisle, we criticize whoever we want. We can hammer this guy. You're on the hot seat. We can talk about people maybe losing their jobs, but then whenever we get challenged, it's First Amendment, freedom of the press.
Right.
No, right? Like if you want to have that type of attack on me, like I've said this to Notre Dame coaches, you have a problem with what I write. Here's my number. Let's talk it out.
Right.
And if you convince me that I'm wrong, I'll offer a correction. I have no problem with that. Actually, funny story, Mike Elko did that with me once, where I critiqued a play and a player in a coverage, and he hits me up and he's like, hey, just so you know, actually that play was on this guy. We were in this coverage, and this is what happened. And he kind of, explained it to him and said, okay, cool. And I make a correction, right? Because I want to be factual.
Right.
And I had that happen with other Notre Dame coaches. Here's my number. If I get it wrong, if you think I'm being personal, you come talk to me about it, and we'll have that conversation. Right. And it's not I'm a reporter. I have a right to say whatever I want. Well, yeah, you can, but you don't have a freedom from certain consequences.
Right.
If your publisher doesn't like it, if your publisher thinks you're bringing negative heat, then you don't necessarily have a right to have that job anymore. You know what I mean? Because if you're violating your duties, which is to report things honestly and fairly, then you're not guaranteed that job. There's too many people don't understand what a right is, in my opinion, Bill. And so it's like, if you want to be able to offer the criticism and be able to take it back, my only thing is like, I don't have any problem blocking people on Twitter. I have one rule. It's not that you can't disagree with me. It's don't make it personal.
Right.
If you make it personal, you're gone. I don't have time for this kind of stuff. Disagree with me all you want. Doesn't make it personal. You and I have had plenty of disagreements.
Oh, for sure.
But we love talking ball. Why? Because I know you've thought through your point of view. You've thought through mine, and it's never personal.
Right.
And I think that's sometimes when people cross the line. Deion has to, I think, at times maybe have a little bit of thicker skin when it comes to criticism of his kids. I think Deion has plenty thick skin when it comes to people criticizing him.
Yeah, he doesn't care. He has
very thin skin when it comes to people criticizing his kids. And that's where he's going to have to, dude, you can't be their dad at the press conference when you're talking about people criticizing him for their things that Shedeur Sanders' maturity or leadership is something that is fair to be critiqued, just like it is for Riley Leonard or Cam Ward or any other quarterback. You can't be his dad in response. You've got to be his coach in response.
I agree with that.
That's where I have the most criticism for him is, dude, you gotta separate being dad at press conferences and stuff like that when it comes to your kids.
That's a good separator and a fair point. So, I mean, but yeah, to put a bow on all of it, that's what I'm looking for week one. You asked for a Notre Dame prediction. I got 27-19.
Yep.
I mean, I think we're in about the same neighborhood on that. I said it on our podcast yesterday. I'll say it again. I just think they're the better team. I think the defense travels. I think they deal with the heat. Yes, Texas A&M can be a goofy place to play. So that's a good tone setter for their season. You got to go down and win those games. And I think one of the things you said yesterday that stuck with me, and it should stick with others, is this is Mike Elko's first game. So first-time coaches are going to do some exciting things. They'll do like a reverse early or a double pass, something like that to get the crowd into it. But once Notre Dame adjusts, settles in, and as long as Riley Leonard doesn't turn the football over, they'll be fine.
Do you have it as a 4 field goal game? Or do you have it as like a missed extra point? They go for 2 late and at some point in time or what?
Man, you really do think it through. I kind of go,
I'm a coach, man. I got to think through those situations. How'd you get to 19?
How I kind of work through predictions sometimes is you look at the over. Okay, what's Vegas thinking? They'll probably be about right. Yeah, and then throw in like they could kick some. They got to make their field goals here, and then So to get to 27, what is that? 4 touchdowns, 2 touchdowns, 4 field goals. How about I do 3 touchdowns and 2 field goals?
For Notre Dame, that's 3 touchdowns, 2 field goals. 27, right? 21
and then
plus 6.
so
19 would be a 7
yeah.
and 4 field goals, or 2 touchdowns, 2 field goals, but you don't get an extra point. So either
let's
you
do
go for
that.
2 or
we'll
something
do that
like
one. Yeah, something goofy happens along. I laughed last week because if you really pay attention to how they do those lines, and the Florida State Georgia Tech line was sitting at 11.5, and you kind of look at how that line will go. Of course, they go for 2 on the first touchdown, so it's 8-0. Threw the line right off.
Right.
Where you're like, now I'm already offline. So that happens more in college football than anything else. But definitely looking forward to it. I hope your listeners enjoy our talks, because this is going to be a feature all season. And,
yes.
People
were excited about it, Bill, when I told them we were going to be, because I've got a lot of requests for, hey, can you talk about other big games?
Yeah.
And like when I talk about it, even if I try to be as fair as possible, it's still a Notre Dame guy talking about this game.
Right.
So it's good to get a different perspective on it.
Yeah. So, and I know we'll spend, we go spend 45 minutes on Michigan, Texas next week.
That's going to be a big one. There's going to be some very interesting games. It's funny, Bill, you bring that up as we wrap this up. I was actually looking ahead to the next couple weeks, because I'm like, there's always that either week 2 or week 3. Like the last few years, there's been some great week 1 games. I think last year might have been one that didn't have a lot of them, but usually there's a lot of good week 1 games. But you get into like week 2 and week 3 is when it gets a little bit like, not a lot of great games. But then I looked at and I was like, you got Texas and Michigan, you've got Arkansas, Oklahoma State, you've got there was a couple others, Baylor at Utah's, Iowa State, Iowa, Cal at Auburn. You dive into some Big Ten games that I think are going to be, the Michigan State at Maryland is going to be a very interesting game to discuss. So I was like, okay, good. We're going to be all right. There's going to be at least enough games to talk about. But like you said, we could spend a whole segment on that Michigan and Texas game for next weekend. That's going to be Tennessee at NC State's another one. Colorado, Nebraska.
Oh, yeah.
So there's going to be Houston at Oklahoma. There's going to be some Boise, Oregon. So I was like, I kind of did one of these. Whew.
Yeah, we got plenty of schedule. We'll be fine next week. We already got a little bit of a jump on it. So
we'll
have some fun.
Week 3, same thing. We'll actually we'll have a good Friday night game next week to talk about, Bill, because we got Arizona at Kansas State the week 3, the following Friday.
Right out of that's a huge Big 12 game. So it goes quick. We'll enjoy it.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thanks for joining me, Bill. Hey, if you guys want to find his work, obviously you can follow Bill on Twitter. I'll have him give you his Twitter handle in a second. You can always find his work at sportingnews.com. Definitely check that out. And Bill does a weekly show at CFB Nation. So go to the CFB Nation podcast and you subscribe there. You get his work. They'll always kind of preview the upcoming games. Once we get into the season, they'll also recap some of the games that were played. And then, of course, on Thursdays here, Bill will be live right here with me at irishbreakdown.com, where we will preview and discuss and have plenty to talk about on the big games. We always said, well, it'll be around 45 minutes, right? But,
we'll go an hour.
You and
I'm sure we'll go
always
an hour.
Add an extra 15, 20 minutes on the time that I always tell you when we are together.
And that's fine. And that's great. Yeah, I'm at Bill Bender 92 at Sporting News. And we have if you want to do a quick predictions, we've got them all up. And, again, very thankful for this opportunity. And we're going to have fun all season. I appreciate it.
I believe you had 3 Notre Dame guys on your first team, all preseason All-American defense.
We did. With Howard and Morrison and Xavier Watts. You can't take Xavier Watts if he was a first teamer last year. So, again, another reason why I think they'll be fine that defense travels on Saturday night.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Father David Penny did bring up a great question, Bill. He said, Brian, have you ever had a short conversation with someone? Lots, but it's usually people I don't want to talk to. I love talking to Bill. So, and I'm trying to remember, what was the game we first met at? Was it, trying to remember what it was?
Louisville, Notre Dame.
19.
Down there on Labor Day, like this weekend, down there on Labor Day.
2019.
And I think
that's what it was.
He came at me with something, and then we ended up talking about it. And it was just like you said, you were something I wrote that you didn't agree with. We didn't fight. I was like,
got into it as far as the discussion. It was a fun discussion.
I was like, okay, what? And I'm like, sweet, let's do it. And then, we've been able to do that. And I remember that was Louisville got off to a quick start. Notre Dame took over second half type game. So, we have a ton of passion for this. to answer the question, no, Brian's never had a short conversation, but neither have I. And I am one of those guys that, I enjoy. So I'll go to my son's practice or I'll go to my daughter's practice. I do enjoy talking to people at the practices about football. And some of the dads, I'm not sure if they don't want to do it. And then others, I'm like, man, we've been talking for an hour. So we have a lot of fun with it. We have some really passionate dads. We're really excited about Grant's scrimmage tonight against Bexley. He's playing some corner, some tight ends, some quarterbacks, some receivers. So for the Irish fans out there, I always picture that this would be best case scenario. He reminds me running around on the field, not nearly as good, but he reminds me of a Jeff Samardzija on the football field. Just the way he runs and catches and those kind of things. So we're very thankful here.
Well, Bill, thanks for joining us. Kyle Berry, thank you. Best of luck to you. Expecting your first child this weekend. Prayers for one healthy baby and mom and an Irish win. We will absolutely do that, man. Couple quick super chats that we got to get out of the way. Bill, you can take off. I'm going to answer some of these questions. I looked at them. None of them are directed at you. So thank you for that. We had a super chat from AST12321. Brian, when we win, can you please go on a rampage on all the doom and gloomer types saying Notre Dame doesn't win these games? And we do. Yeah, I'll have a lot to, if they win, I will certainly have a lot to say about that. I will try to be, good about it, but we'll see how the game kind of plays out. Tyler Evans with a super chat. Thank you, Tyler, very, very much. Tyler says, give me Notre Dame 31 and A&M 7. The offense will show out and the D will be locked down. Let's go Irish. I had another one from Kenny Moore. Thank you for super chat, Kenny. 28-0 Irish. I tell you guys, if you two are right and Notre Dame wins convincingly, that's the only kind of statement that I think Notre Dame can make. I think if Notre Dame goes on the road and wins this game, it's like, okay, that's what they should do. I mean, Notre Dame should go on the road and win this game. I mean, that's just kind of, that's just how I see it, right? My wife jumping into a short conversation for Brian is under 40 minutes. My wife even coming at it, and I can't get mad at her. I told her, my wife, I'll never get mad at you for speaking the truth. And so she speaks the truth there. But if you guys are correct and this game isn't close, that's the statement win. Just Notre Dame winning 24-16. My prediction, Bill's got 27-19. That's like, okay, good job. You did what you're supposed to do. Good job. It's a good win. It's something you say, hey, you're built on something. But it's not a Notre Dame has arrived. They beat A&M on the road. Yay, by a field goal. It's, hey, good job. You did what you're supposed to do. Now let's keep going forward. A blowout win would be the only thing that they could do that's like, oh, wow, Notre Dame made a statement today. That's kind of where I'm at on that one. So got another super chat from my guy, Pete Weber. Thank you, Pete Weber, very, very much. Congrats on the wedding to the Trevor Honeymoon Fund. I will make sure that Trevor gets that message and that cut of the super chat. Absolutely. So we appreciate you, Pete. Then Michael S. super chat. In the past, did Notre Dame ever start an O-line with as little experience as this O-line, and what was the result? The last time that I remember Notre Dame starting an offensive line with this little of experience was 1988. And I believe they had 4 career offensive line starts. Andy Heck made some tight end starts. Tim Grunhard made a couple late season starts in 1987, sort of like what Billy Schrouth and Ashton Craig did, but it was between like 4 to 5 or 6 career starts coming back. They lost all 5 starters from the year before in 1988, and the result was Notre Dame beat Michigan in the opener, a ranked Michigan team who finished the year ranked, I believe, 5th overall, beat a ranked Michigan State team, I believe, the next week, beat number 1 Miami, beat number 2 USC, and then beat number 3 West Virginia in the Fiesta Bowl to win the national title. So, yes, Notre Dame has in the past had a season where they went into the season with a very inexperienced offensive line and a young group of young players. That 1988 Notre Dame team started 2 true freshmen on offense, guy by the name of Rocket Ismail. Don't know if you remember him. And they started another freshman by the name of Derek Brown. They started a true sophomore on that team by the name of Ricky Waters. Their quarterback had very little experience, was a guy that was a very athletic player with a big arm, but criticized for his accuracy in that instance, and they ended up being pretty good. But they had a very veteran defense mixed with some really talented younger players. Todd Light is a true sophomore, just saying. So, yeah, they've done this before. 1987, 2007, they had a very inexperienced offensive line, but it had actually more experience than this one because you had Sam Young coming back, and Sam Young was a 2-year starter. Or no, was a full-year starter the year before. So that unit had a lot more experience than this one did. So that's where, yeah. So the last time they had a season, I believe the last time was 1988, where they went into a season with fewer than 10 career starts on their offensive line, and that season turned out okay. So I would say I would say that it's not what you want to be, but if the talent's there and defense can carry you for a little bit and your skill players can step up and make some plays, you'll be all right. You'll be all right. So that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. I'll be back tomorrow, 1:00 live tomorrow before I head to the airport. So I'll finish the show and then head straight to the airport to head down to Texas. Very much looking forward to that. And, of course, we'll have our post-game show about probably have Vince launch it, probably start 10 minutes after the game ends. So we'll get that thing settled there towards the end, get that ready to go. It'll be Vince, Ryan, Trevor, and I believe Sean Davis will all be with you on the post-game show. And then I'll be back Monday night with at 7:00 with the Upon Further Review breakdown. And then I'll also have some video breakdowns that will be on the message board on Monday before the show. That will be for premium members only. I'm going to break down several aspects of the game in video form and some stat breakdowns, some different things along those lines. You're going to check that out on Monday. But you got to be a premium member, folks. So go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. You can sign up for a monthly membership. You can sign up for, I saw On3 was offering a special rate of $4.99, which means you pay $4.99 now and it goes up next year. At Irish Breakdown, it's just $4.99. That's all it is. And so you sign up for there. It's $49.99 for a year, or you can join one of our booster clubs and give us a little extra support. You do get some cool merch if you do join the booster club. So check that out, all at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Have an awesome rest of your day. IB Nation Sports Talk at 5:00 tonight. For all those going to the game, travel safe, enjoy yourselves, represent Notre Dame the way that you know that we can represent Notre Dame. And I'll see you guys again here very, very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.